The Love Clause. Written by Liwen Ho. Chapter 1. Philip. Philip, do you have a minute? Philip Wong grumbled under his breath, his eyes fixed on the stack of papers piled high on his desk. He was under a deadline to prepare a deposition and had no time for interruptions. Whoever was calling out to him sounded too cheery for a Monday and didn't even have the decency to address him by his surname. Philip jerked his head up, ready to reprimand whichever legal intern was standing at his office door. However, it was Jack Wen, the head of his law firm, who greeted him wearing khakis and a tropical print shirt. "Mr. Wen, you're back." His normally uptight boss flashed him a carefree smile and plopped down in a chair across from him. "I am. Isn't it a beautiful day? I didn't expect you in the office so soon." Philip rose halfway in his chair and extended his hand. The casual high five he received in return caused his jaw to drop. He quickly schooled his expression and sat down. In all the years he'd been at Wen, Chen, and Lan, he'd never seen his boss in such casual clothing, much less with a smile on his face. What in the world had happened? "How are you feeling, sir?" The afternoon sunlight streaming in through the side window shone on Mr. Wen's head, highlighting its shiny dome. The middle-aged man's brown eyes twinkled as brightly. "I'm great. The birds are singing, the sun's shining, I'm walking and breathing, life couldn't be better. Don't you agree, Phil?" He leaned across the desk and asked, "You don't mind if I call you Phil, do you? I thought it was time we got more familiar with each other. You've been part of this law firm for 7 years now, we're practically family." Philip furrowed his brows. "Actually, it'll be 9 years next week, the day after Christmas." He tried to keep his tone light, despite the frustration building in his chest. He hadn't worked his tail off all these years for fun. He'd had his heart set on making partner by the time he was 30. 3 years later, his promotion still hadn't come. Perhaps his boss's memory was to blame. Regardless, this was not the time to get on Mr. Wen's bad side, not on his first day back from medical leave. "But of course, you may call me Philosophy. And you may call me Jack." Mr. Wen grinned. "I want to change things up in this office. Let's forget the formalities. From now on, we're going to make this a positive and happy place to work." "Agreed." Philip narrowed his eyes and gave his boss a thorough once-over. Weeks ago, he would have had no qualms agreeing to anything Mr. Wen, Jack, said, especially when it involved their work as divorce attorneys. Today, however, he didn't know how to reply. He simply nodded and let his boss continue talking. "That's why I've decided it's time we started spending more effort on living than on working." "Excuse me?" Philip couldn't comprehend what Jack meant. What else was there to life besides work? "What exactly do you have in mind?" Leaning back, Jack laced his hands together and placed them behind his head. "A work-life balance, with an emphasis on the latter. We'll start by getting some healthy snacks in the break room. Hire a massage therapist to come on site. Perhaps even require everyone to take a lunch break every day away from their desk," he threw in with an accusatory smirk. Words failed Philip, a rare occurrence for someone trained in negotiation. He swallowed hard and sat in stunned silence. Could it be the paramedics had shocked more than Jack's heart? Maybe his brain, too. "I had plenty of time this past month to think about my priorities in life. It's only natural when you come face to face with your own mortality." Jack's eyes glazed over briefly before he narrowed them at Philip. "Do you know the one thing I regretted the most after I woke up in the hospital?" Philip cocked his head, awaiting Jack's answer. When it didn't come, he threw out his own. "Missing your court hearings." For a moment, Philip caught a glimpse of his boss's trademark glare that his colleagues had dubbed the death trap. This was the ruthless attorney Philip remembered well. The intensity faded, however, as Jack shut his eyes. When he opened them again, there was compassion, even pity, in his face. Sighing, Jack ran his hands down his face. "No, son. I didn't care about the piles of paperwork on my desk or the clients I was supposed to meet. All I wished for was to see my children. I'll be honest with you. I would trade all the money I've made and all the time I poured into this firm if I could have my family back in my life again. Including my ex-wife, he added with a soft snicker. Jack's mournful words lingered in the air, causing an unsettled feeling in Philip's stomach. He glanced down at his hands and clenched them. He wanted to scoff and tell his boss that having his family by his side wouldn't solve a single thing. Maybe their presence would bring some initial comfort, but sooner or later, his so-called loved ones would only cause pain and disappointment. Philip understood this all too well. His own parents had divorced when he was 4, and his sister had become a single mom when her marriage hit the 7-year itch. He himself had been through a bad breakup that had left him standing at the altar alone. As far as Philip was concerned, it was better to be single and lonely than married and miserable. He gave Jack a curt nod. Despite how he felt about his boss's newfound revelation, he wouldn't disagree with him. The proper thing to do was offer some sympathy for Jack after his recent health scare. Moreover, in their Chinese culture, elders were to be shown respect at all times. I'm sorry to hear that. It's not an easy situation to be in, I imagine. Jack's face brightened. That's exactly my point philosophy. You're still young, as are many of the folks in our firm. You haven't experienced this worst-case scenario yet, and hopefully you never will. But I want you to imagine what it's like being in my shoes and start reevaluating your priorities. Don't end up like me 30 years from now, sad and lonely, because you valued your job more than relationships. Philip couldn't help it, this time he did scoff out loud. Did Jack forget what line of work they were in? He'd seen too many broken marriages to believe in love. A spouse was not a quick fix for loneliness. The only living, breathing beings he'd ever open his heart up to were animals. He'd rather get a cat than waste his time and money on a woman. At least pets were trustworthy and faithful. You don't have to worry about me. I like my independence and I thrive on staying busy. I was made to work. On that note, Philip decided to be bold and voice his thoughts. With Jack opening up to him like this, it was as good a time as any to talk about his career advancement. Speaking of work, I'd like to discuss my future with you. I don't mean to boast, but we all know I'm the top attorney around here. I'm methodical in my research, I think fast under pressure, and I have no problems putting in 70 hours a week. I'm more than willing to do my all to partner, he emphasized the word with a sly smile, with you to make our firm the best one in San Francisco. I hope you'll take my offer into consideration, Jack. His boss's expression sobered. I appreciate all you've sacrificed for this firm, Phil, really I do. You're the best attorney I've got, and it's about time I rewarded you for your hard work. But I will not have your health and happiness on my conscience. Before I can make you a partner, I need you to show me you have a life outside of this office. It took everything in Philip to not roll his eyes. This was getting ridiculous. Who did his boss think he was? One heart attack and he'd taken on the role of life coach. With all due respect, Jack, what happens outside of work has no bearing on my ability to perform my job. If you're concerned about my health, I'll gladly show you the results from my most recent blood work. I'm as healthy as he thought quickly, a dragon. Surely, Jack would appreciate this comparison to the Asian symbol of power, strength, and good luck. Jack offered him a droll smile. Of course you are. But soon enough, you'll be hitting your midlife crisis, getting ulcers, and losing your hair. He gestured to his own bald head. When that happens, you'll need, and want, someone by your side. A woman who will love you and take care of you, someone you will treasure more than your job. Trust me on this, philosophy. Philip grimaced. Trust, that was precisely his problem. He trusted no one but himself. A beeping noise sounded from Jack's pocket. He pulled his phone out and swiped at the screen. It's time for my yoga class, he announced as he bounced up from his chair. Think about what I said, Phil. Better yet, start making some plans. I expect to see you with a date at our Christmas party. Philip's body stiffened. That's in 5 days. With your work ethic, Jack replied, I bet you could find someone to ask by this afternoon. Jack strode to the doorway and paused. Look around. We've got a couple of great women right here in the office. You can't be serious, sir, Philip spluttered. Doesn't that violate some kind of company policy? Jack shrugged. I make the rules around here, so no. He rapped on the doorframe and grinned. Good chatting with you, Phil. Let's do this again. Philip watched the palm trees on his boss's shirt blur as Jack walked out of the room. He blinked quickly, not quite believing what had just transpired. He, hotshot divorce attorney Philip Wong, had just lost his first case. Even worse, he needed to find a woman to date.
Chapter 2. Vanessa. Ouch. Is it supposed to hurt this much? Vanessa Lim opened one eye to peek at her coworker, Bryn Garvin, who was seated beside her. Bryn winced as a knuckle poked the sole of her bare foot, then released a long breath as the sharp pain subsided. Smiling through gritted teeth, Vanessa murmured, Yes, but it's good for you. Chinese foot massages are all the rage in Asia. Each part of the foot is supposedly connected to a part of your body, so wherever you feel pain, that part of the body has a problem. Bryn groaned, both hands clenched in tight fists over her eyes. Her blonde curls flew around as she squirmed in her high-back office chair. If that's true, then I've got problems all over me. Ow. Can you ask her to ease up a little? Opening her other eye, Vanessa waved to the older woman going to town on Bryn's foot. Ah ye, she called the masseuse auntie in Mandarin, softer, please. The woman replied with a toothy grin and nodded. Ah, much better. A sigh of relief escaped Bryn's lips. For a second I thought Mr. Wen meant to torture us instead of treat us with these massages. Vanessa chuckled. She herself had questioned their boss's sudden transformation from the Grinch to Santa Claus. Ever since he had returned from medical leave a day ago, he'd been showering the staff with special treats. Bottled water in the break room. Free apples and bananas on their desks. On-site massages once a week. Vanessa still couldn't believe how much Mr. Wen had changed. I think the heart attack did him good, not that I'd ever wish a health crisis on anyone. But at least he learned from it and is making some good lifestyle choices because of it. Unlike some people I know, she added with a groan. Bryn faced her with compassion in her blue eyes. Are you talking about your mom? How's she doing these days? She could be better. Vanessa stifled a yawn. Outside of work, she'd been waiting on her mom hand and foot for the past few weeks since her knee surgery. She only exercises when the physical therapist comes over, so she's not recuperating as fast as she should be. I keep telling her she needs to use her stationary bike, but she's as stubborn as an ox. Come to think of it, she was born in the year of the ox. Talking to her is like reasoning with a kid who won't listen. So kind of like talking to yourself, Bryn asked. Hey! Vanessa exclaimed. Whose side are you on? Vanessa bit back a smile. She'd worked with Bryn long enough to know she was only teasing. The two of them had started at the firm around the same time 4 years ago. I am not that stubborn. Bryn grinned. Says the girl who works 70 hours a week and is so tired she wore mismatched earrings to the office today. Mismatched, seriously? Vanessa fingered her earlobes, touching the curved outlines of 2 hoop earrings. She promptly removed them and noticed one was gold, the other silver. Sighing, she placed them into the pocket of her blazer. Oops. At least this isn't as bad as the time I wore one black pump and one nude-colored one. Or the time my slip showed the entire day before Mr. Wong pointed it out to me. I still have nightmares about that. Bryn gasped. You've been dreaming about our colleague? Vanessa rolled her eyes at Bryn's tone. Yes, she was teasing her again, but this time it wasn't funny. Philip Wong, Mr. Hotshot attorney, wasn't someone she ever wanted to think about outside the office. She recalled their most recent conversation. He'd said, "I needed that transcription yesterday, Miss Lim. This office runs like a well-oiled machine, but if one gear stops working, the whole machine stops working. Don't be that one gear." She shuddered just thinking about his unpleasant demeanor. "Not exactly," she replied to Bryn. "Only about those haughty eyes of his that he uses to scrutinize people." "Oh wait, arg." Vanessa's masseuse raised her head. The older woman shot her a questioning glance and stopped, kneading the back of her calf. "No, it's good, thank you," Vanessa reassured her. If only she could reassure herself. The very document she owed Mr. Wong was the one she'd forgotten to deliver to his desk that morning. This was bad, very bad. "I totally forgot to give him the transcription he asked for. I'm surprised he hasn't come looking for me yet." "He probably has, but you've been hiding out here for the past 45 minutes. Bryn smirked. "It's a good thing I put a do not disturb sign on the door. If I hadn't, the attorneys would be walking in and out of here every 5 minutes demanding stuff from us. They need to chill and give us some time off. That's what Mr. Wen ordered. Who are we to argue with the boss?" "I guess so," Vanessa replied. Vanessa couldn't help smiling. Bryn possessed a certain charm and ease about her, and she spoke her mind so freely. Perhaps it was because she hadn't grown up with a tiger mom. And she wasn't a 27-year-old woman still living at home with said mom. It was times like this that Vanessa really admired Bryn. Her friend hadn't been raised with the cultural expectations of getting straight A's or the need to obey every command and do everything perfectly. Yet, even with her Chinese ways ingrained in her, Vanessa was still failing at her job. "I can't believe I forgot the transcription. It's all ready to go, I just need to print it out." "Don't be so hard on yourself, Ness," Bryn said. "You've got so much on your plate, I'm surprised you didn't show up with your shirt on backwards. That's not possible when your mother inspects your outfit before you leave the house." Vanessa moaned. "I escaped when she was in the bathroom today, which explains the earrings." "Oh, man. Your life is so fun. If only that were the truth." "I really need to move out," Vanessa lamented. "Then do it," Bryn stated. "Move out. You've been talking about it ever since I met you." "I can't," Vanessa sighed. "Not when my mom needs me. I promised my dad I'd take care of her." "I know," Bryn remarked. "But would your dad have wanted you to give up on your dreams?" Vanessa's eyes watered as she thought of the kind-hearted man she'd inherited her thick, wavy hair from. Her dad had passed away from complications due to hepatitis C soon after her college graduation. As an only child, she'd left her pursuit of medical school to care for her mom. Instead, she became a receptionist at One, Chen, and Lon, thanks to her mom's mahjong connections, then advanced to her current position after 3 months. The law field didn't appeal to her much, but a job was a job. It paid the bills and kept her too busy to think about what she'd rather be doing, saving lives. "Maybe someday I'll get back to it. For now, I have to stop my mom's newest mission in life. Sitting around all day has given her way too much time to think." "Your mom's such a hoot," Bryn exclaimed. "What's she up to now?" "At the rate she's recovering," Vanessa began, "or not recovering, she says she won't be able to make it to my cousin's wedding next week." "Okay. So, you'll need to go alone?" "Not exactly," Vanessa sighed. "Since we already RSVP'd for 2 people, my aunt expects 2 mouths to feed at dinner. If only I show up, it'll be the start of another family feud about money, and we'll likely have to pay for that head count, which my mom refuses to do. So, for the sake of keeping peace, she wants me to find someone to take her place." Vanessa rolled her eyes at the incredulous suggestion. She told me to start looking for a date at work. Silence, followed by laughter, resounded in the small room. Bryn quickly sobered when Vanessa didn't join in. "This is awesome," Bryn exclaimed. "So, who are you going to ask?" "Awesome? Not even remotely." She doubted any of the men in their office cared to date. They were too intent on avoiding the same heartbreak their clients faced. She herself had grown jaded about love a month after she started working here. She'd tried talking her mom out of this idea, and even offered to pay for the extra meal, but it was no use. Her mom's final instruction was for Vanessa to keep her eyes open for someone compatible according to Chinese standards. "You wouldn't happen to know any tall Chinese guys with type A blood, would you?" "Type A?" Bryn asked. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Some Chinese believe different blood types translate to different personalities. I'm a type O who supposedly gets along well with a type A." "Is that so?" Bryn remarked. "That's why we get along so well. I'm a type O." "Well, if I can find a male version of you," Vanessa declared, "I'll be all set." "So, what are you going to do? Go around the office asking for people's blood types?" "Don't be silly," Vanessa replied. "This is the last place I'd go looking for a date. I think I'd have better luck online. There's a dating site, Een and Young, that I'm looking at. One of my cousins recommended it." "Hold that thought," Bryn began, her tone suddenly enthusiastic. "I think you're in luck. There's one man around here who seems to have a vested interest in you." "What?" Vanessa asked. "Who are you talking about?" "Look who found you." Bryn nodded toward the door where someone had lifted the "Do Not Disturb" sign covering the window. A pair of dark brown eyes peered inside, sweeping around the room until it landed on Vanessa. A line formed between those eyes as the individual's face flushed red. "Uh-oh." Vanessa recognized that look. Incessant knocking filled the air, accompanying the slapping sounds coming from Vanessa's legs as the masseuse gave them a final workout. Bryn scoffed. "There goes our peace and quiet." "You can say that again," Vanessa lamented. She was going to have to face the music sooner or later, and it looked like Mr. Wong was insisting on sooner. "Fine, so be it." After the masseuse wiped her legs with a warm, moist towel, Vanessa begrudgingly slipped on her heels and stood up. Beside her, Bryn winked. "Play it cool. Don't let him get to you. Just remember, he needs you more than you need him." Vanessa wondered about the validity of her friend's words, but didn't have time to dwell on them. The next thing she knew, the door swung open and an irritated-looking man charged in. "Miss Lim, I've been looking everywhere for you." Maybe Bryn was right. Swallowing her insecurities, Vanessa squared her shoulders and faced Mr. Wong, ready to stand her ground. She could handle whatever he had to say to her. Well, make that almost whatever, because she certainly didn't expect the proposition he would soon be making.
Chapter 3. Philip. Yes. The petite woman standing before Philip met his gaze head-on and even lifted her chin a little in defiance. "How can I help you?" Philip raised a brow. Despite Miss Lim's attempt to appear strong and confident, she couldn't disguise the trembling in her voice. He didn't know whether to be amused or annoyed. On second thought, he chose the latter, especially after the wild goose chase he'd been on this morning searching for her. "Miss Lim, this is clearly unprofessional behavior. I don't understand how you can justify getting a massage when you should be working on the transcription you promised me. What do you have to say for yourself?" Her brown eyes widened, and she began chewing on her lower lip. With minimal makeup on and her hair trailing over one shoulder in a braid, she resembled a schoolgirl, a very naive one. With each passing second, her chin fell until she was talking to the ground. "I'm sorry I forgot to give it to you earlier, Mr. Wong. I lost track of time." Philip shook his head in disbelief. Lost track of time. Where do you think you are, the spa? Ms. Lim raised her head and glanced around. Is that a rhetorical question? I mean no disrespect, but this room has technically been turned into a spa of sorts. His jaw went slack. Ms. Lim was losing credibility in his eyes, fast. Was she seriously dwelling on such a non-essential point? He didn't care that candles had replaced the harsh lighting or that a floral aroma now filled the air. This office was still a place of employment. Regardless of what this room may look like, he continued, we still have clients who depend on us. We don't have time, he waved around the room, for this kind of nonsense. One of the masseuses took his gesture as a sign that he was interested in a massage. She gestured enthusiastically for him to sit down. At least someone around here understood the value of hard work. He shook his head but thanked her for her effort. Xie, aye. The blonde woman Ms. Lim had been sitting next to stood up and walked over. She greeted Philip with a smile bordering on a smirk. Good morning, Mr. Wong. Have you scheduled your massage appointment like Mr. Wen recommended? Philip narrowed his eyes at Ms. Lim's would-be sidekick. If she was trying to change the subject, it wasn't working. No, I haven't, Ms. Garvin. I don't believe in massages. Makes the body, not to mention the mind, weak. He refocused his attention on Ms. Lim and resumed their conversation before anyone else could interrupt. The transcription. When will it be ready? Her face brightened for a moment. It's ready. I just need to print it out. I can do that right now and bring it to your office. No need, he answered. I'll come get it myself and save you a trip. And also ensure she didn't drag her feet any longer, he thought to himself. Ah, okay. When would you like it? She asked. He wondered what part of their conversation Ms. Lim had missed. Yesterday, but now will do. Oh, of course, she replied. Follow me. After flashing a sheepish smile at her friend, Ms. Lim opened the door and stepped outside. Philip followed her into the hallway, squinting as he adjusted to the fluorescent lights overhead. He slowed his steps and closed his eyes for a moment. The lights, coupled with the aftermath of another late night of work, made his eyes extra tired and dry. No doubt he'd have trouble removing his contact lenses later. It was a minor side effect of ensuring he won his clients' cases, so he didn't mind. Someone needed to watch out for the victims of nasty divorces. Releasing a long breath, he opened his eyes and looked ahead. To his surprise, Ms. Lim was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps she was finally feeling the urgency of the situation. He picked up his pace to catch up. His efforts ended with him running smack into her as he rounded the corner. Phil, a male voice called out to him from behind. He groaned inwardly as he recognized that too happy for a Tuesday voice. Mr. Wen reached them and patted him on the shoulder. I see you've found Vanessa. Oh yes, he had. Philip caught a whiff of a sweet, heady fragrance coming from the woman he was now nose to nose with. Ms. Lim's big brown eyes, their pupils dilated in fear, peered up at him. It was the most uncomfortable position he'd been in, yet he couldn't seem to move. Something about her perfume had him frozen in place. Ms. Lim broke off their gaze and stepped back first. Her cheeks were as pink as the shade of her bright lipstick. Where did you go? She asked him. I thought you were right behind me. Mr. Wen looked from one person to the other and back again. Well, it doesn't matter where either of you has been, he declared. The important thing is that you're both here now. He brushed his hands together as if to indicate his job here was finished. Which is not the case for me because I'm off to my spin class. Good day, you two. And remember what we talked about yesterday, Phil, he added with a wink. How could he not? Finding a date for the Christmas party was part of the reason Philip had stayed up late last night. It was ridiculous how he had lost sleep over a woman, or lack of one. Ridiculous and unprofessional. Surely, he could talk some sense into Mr. Wen. Before he could give a rebuttal, however, his boss had walked halfway down the hall. I don't understand, he muttered under his breath. What happened to him? It's pretty amazing, isn't it? Ms. Lim piped up. Mr. Wen's like a new man. I'm so happy for him and his new lease on life. What was it with Ms. Lim and rhetorical questions? Philip shook his head adamantly, so much so that the hair on the top of his head swayed. I rather like the old one. This new one hinders office productivity, as you're well aware of. He couldn't help his accusatory tone, his frustration level was off the charts now. Of course, Ms. Lim would approve of Mr. Wen's new behavior. And as expected, she had resumed her dawdling. The transcription, Ms. Lim. Oh yes, she exclaimed as she rushed inside her cubicle. She sat down at her desk and clicked on her computer mouse. Let me get that for you. Philip planted himself behind her chair, arms crossed over his chest. Finally, they were getting down to business. Or so he thought. When the screensaver faded away, a website appeared. About 24 headshots featuring young Asian men and women filled the screen. Above the photos, the words yin and yang, where two halves make a whole, scrolled across in bold red font. Ms. Lim yelped in embarrassment as she furiously clicked on the tab to close the window. She glanced over her shoulder at Philip and winced. Pretend you didn't see that. He rolled his eyes. It's none of my business what you look at, but I sure hope your attempt at online dating was not the reason you fell behind on your work. No, of course not. I only started looking at the site this morning. And believe me, it's not because I want to. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Resignation laced Ms. Lim's words, causing her shoulders to droop. She busied herself on her computer, not bothering to explain her comment. She clicked on another tab, then proceeded to print out the document on the screen. Spinning in her chair, she did a 180 until she faced him. She cocked her head to one side and gave him a questioning glance. The scent of her perfume tickled Philip's nose again. Without thinking, he inhaled deeply. Seconds passed before he noticed she was staring at him, waiting for a reply. Yes, what is it? He asked. May I pass? She pointed to the other end of the hall. I need to get to the printer. The printer, right, he mumbled as he stepped to the side. He watched her walk away, the hem of her dark blue dress swaying around her knees. A shiny gleam caught his eyes, drawing them down to her shapely calves. He quickly raised his head, chastising himself for his wandering gaze. What was he doing? Perhaps he had been thinking about dating so much, his mind was considering prospects. That was the only reason he could come up with to explain his unusual behavior. He had no reason and no time to be checking out a woman. Especially one like Ms. Lim. He may need a date for the Christmas party, but he'd rather attend it with a friend. The problem was, he had no real friends with the long work hours he kept. The only women he knew of were through his sister. Unfortunately, they were all engaged or married. What he needed was to find a casual acquaintance, someone willing to dress up and make small talk with his colleagues. Where in the world would he find a woman like that on such short notice? His gaze flickered to Ms. Lim's computer monitor. Desperate times did call for desperate measures. The dating site she'd been looking at, what was it called? He looked to where the printer was located, but Ms. Lim wasn't there. Instead, he heard her laughing in the cubicle next to it. Distracted again. Philip cleared his throat, projecting the guttural sound to get Ms. Lim's attention. When that didn't work, he held up one hand and snapped his fingers. Several heads in the adjacent cubicles popped up. The colleague Ms. Lim was talking to nodded in Philip's direction. Only then did she look up. Cheeks flushed, she hurried back to her cubicle. She gave Philip a stack of papers, along with a sheepish smile. Sorry, I got distracted, he interjected, adding a smirk for good measure. Philip studied her for a moment. Had she always been this flighty? Sure, Ms. Lim could be a bit, for lack of a better word, sloppy. He still remembered the time he caught her slip hanging out. And just the other day she had left a price tag poking out the side of her blouse. However, he took her to be more responsible with her work. What was going on with her lately? This behavior of yours is unacceptable, he remarked. What was so important it couldn't wait? Unacceptable? She exclaimed. Her brown eyes grew round, making her look like an anime character. I was just saying hi to our coworker and asking how her dad's doing. He had knee surgery recently like my mom, so we've been comparing notes on their recovery. Anyway, I won't bother you with the details. I'm sorry I kept you waiting. I'll be sure to get the next document to you on time. Those were the words he wanted to hear. I appreciate that, Ms. Lim. She rested one hand on her chair, ready to sit down. Is there anything else you need from me, Mr. Wong? He paused. Well, since she offered, he might as well ask. Actually, there is one thing. Yes. What was that website you were looking at earlier? The mixture of surprise and amusement on Ms. Lim's face was enough to make Philip regret his question. Oh, the things he was willing to do to advance his career.
Chapter 4. Vanessa. Excuse me, she asked him. It took everything in Vanessa to clamp her lips together and not smile. Philip Wong was interested in dating? She didn't think he had a relational bone in his body. The website, he began with an insinuating tone, you know, the one you closed earlier? The website I closed earlier, she repeated as she tapped her chin. Vanessa wondered how long she could play dumb because she sure enjoyed watching Mr. Wong squirm. There was no ill intent on her part, just a yearning for a little role reversal. It felt good to be in the position of power for a change. Let me think, it's a simple question, Ms. Lim. Mr. Wong gawked at her, frustration etched in the lines creasing his forehead. His nostrils flared so wildly, it was a wonder smoke didn't billow out. You know what, never mind. I'll Google it myself. No, wait. Vanessa called out as he turned to leave. Fine, it was time to play nice. It's yinyang.com. He halted his steps and faced her. The forced smile on his face didn't reach his eyes, which were intense and dark. When he spoke, his tone held a caustic edge. Thank you. That wasn't so hard now, was it? Vanessa's chest tightened. Oh man, this guy was a piece of work. She already felt sorry for the dates he'd be paired up with. Sure, most Asian women, and their mothers, would consider him a catch. He appeared to be the perfect man on paper. An Ivy League degree. A prestigious career. A fancy car. Those things would get him past the initial screening phase. But once he made it to an in-person date, all bets were off. Even his enviable height, by Asian standards, and a head of thick hair, she bet he spent a fortune on products for couldn't make up for his heart. Or lack of one. She cringed. Some choice words formed on her lips, threatening to spill out, but she kept her tongue in check. She was going to be the bigger woman in this situation. I didn't know you were interested in online dating, she commented, choosing to ignore his insult earlier. I'm not, he answered. Dating is a waste of time. Especially online dating, which I find to be superficial and petty. Everyone presents their best selves with their glamour headshots and flowery words. It's all a setup for a very big fall in the end. She furrowed her brow, confused by his intentions. He'd spat out his answer as if it left a bad taste in his mouth. Then why did you ask about the site? I assumed you were looking for a date. He lowered his voice to a whisper. I am. Don't sound so excited now, she remarked. Her joke fell on deaf ears, according to his deadpan expression. This was worse than she thought. It was one thing not to have a heart, but no humor either. This is not a laughing matter, Ms. Lim. Mr. Wong glanced around the area as if to check if anyone was within earshot. Fortunately, it was nearing lunchtime and the adjacent cubicles were empty. Satisfied with their level of privacy, he continued. It's a professional one. I need to bring a date to the Christmas party. The emphasis he placed on the word need made Vanessa think there was more to the story than he was letting on. Why this party? She asked. You've never brought anyone to any of our company events before. It's rather complicated. I just need to this time. He rubbed the back of his neck, discomfort written all over his face. I can't explain why. Can't or won't, she asked. Vanessa bit her lower lip. She surprised herself with her boldness. Seeing this uncertain side of Mr. Wong, however, made him a little more human and a lot less scary. How is it complicated? He shot her an annoyed glare. Don't worry about it, he replied. This doesn't concern you. Yikes. His prickliness was back in full force. And just when she thought he was becoming relatable. She took a step back in case the darts shooting out of his eyes turned into real ones. She held up both hands in a gesture of peace. I wasn't trying to pry, she stated. I just thought we were having a friendly conversation. You know, one where I ask a question and you give an answer, and vice versa. I know what a conversation is, he scoffed. I negotiate and argue cases for a living. I have no trouble with words. I'm a lawyer. Of course, I know how to carry on conversations. She quirked a brow. Was he serious? Before she could heed her thoughts, a question tumbled out of her mouth. How can you possibly think interrogating people on a witness stand is the same as having a conversation? Mr. Wong didn't answer, choosing instead to flick the front of his suit jacket back like a cape. In another swift motion, he fisted his hands and placed them on his hips. A few moments passed as he stewed in silence. The question hung in the space between them, echoing throughout the nearly empty office. Only the upbeat melody of a song playing from the speakers broke through the quiet, telling them Christmas Eve was coming soon. Vanessa gulped. She'd done it this time. Her heart rate quickened as Mr. Wong's intense dark eyes zeroed in on their target, her. So, this was how it felt to be trapped in a cage, or in her case, an 8x8 cubicle, with a lion. A muscle along his jawline twitched. Then just as quickly, his whole face relaxed. He narrowed his eyes and remarked, Is that a rhetorical question, Ms. Lim? Vanessa's jaw dropped. Had she heard correctly? Did Philip Wong just say something funny? Touché, he stated as he shrugged. I guess I'm not much of a communicator outside the courtroom. Well, it depends on what your definition of communicate is, she replied. She hesitated, unsure of how much to say. This new side of Mr. Wong was such a pleasure to see, she didn't want to disturb their flow of conversation. It seemed humor was a safe bet to use. It also depends on whether I'm speaking under oath, she added with a playful lilt to her voice. Surprise registered on his face before it gave way to amusement. The corners of his mouth twitched rapidly until they curved up in a wide, bona fide grin. Vanessa grabbed onto her chair back to keep from falling over. She'd never seen Mr. Wong smile so genuinely before. Or laugh. At least she assumed that was the noise coming from him. It grew from deep within his chest, resonating within his throat and finally escaping through his lips in punctuated ho-ho-hos. The sound went well with the lyrics of the song playing overhead. Jolly old St. Nicholas, indeed. Was this the Christmas spirit at play? Because this was surely equivalent to a miracle, their very own miracle on Market Street. She joined in on the laughter, trying to inject some enthusiasm into hers. Part of her wondered if she was hallucinating because there was no way she could make Mr. Wong this happy. The best she'd done during the years they'd worked together was give him plenty of reasons to wear a smile upside down. He frowned so often around her that she'd assumed he couldn't smile at all. Apparently, he could. And now he was smiling at her with a wild look in his eyes. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. Oh dear. Where were her colleagues when she needed them? Mr. Wong took a moment to compose himself, then remarked. Miss Lim, you're actually quite funny. Thanks? Her reply came out more like a question. She still didn't know if she should let her guard down around this man. You're kind of funny, too, she stated. And you look nice when you smile. Quite handsome, in fact. Vanessa clamped her mouth shut. Did she say that out loud? And that laugh, wow, just wow, she added quickly to cover up her embarrassment. I'm sure you'll get matched with plenty of women on that site. He smoothed one hand gently over the top of his head. I agree. I don't think it would be difficult at all. I've received my share of advances from female clients over the years. You have? She stammered. I mean, of course you have. Vanessa had to assume those clients were pretty desperate to consider Mr. Wong. But then again, any man who took their side in a nasty divorce case would appear like a good catch. So, why don't you ask one of them to be your date? Mr. Wong looked at her like she'd suggested shaving off his precious hair. The last thing I need is a woman fawning over me. I'm not looking for a commitment. I need someone who will be willing to play the part of my date for one evening, not a lifetime. Oh. The pieces were falling into place now. You need a fake date. Precisely, he stated. She cocked her head as she studied him. With a satisfied smile on his face, Mr. Wong almost appeared friendly. And dare she say, attractive, in a cocky way. Maybe her earlier comment wasn't too far off. If all you're looking for is a fake date for the party, yin and yang won't work for you. The smile disappeared. Why not? My cousin who recommended the site to me said there's a minimum requirement of 8 dates per match. They want to be sure people are in it for the right reasons and will give each person they're matched with a fair chance. 8 dates? He exclaimed. What kind of crazy idea is that? A Chinese one, she replied. You know, 8 is considered a lucky number because it sounds like fa in Mandarin, which means fortune, he finished for her. I know what it means. He rolled his eyes. This is ridiculous. The only number of dates they should ban is 4, because, she jumped in, it sounds like the word for death. That's a good one. She laughed until she realized he hadn't meant it as a joke. You, make a good point. That's what I'm good at doing, he touted in his usual high and mighty tone. Well, there must be some way around this rule. I refuse to spend my time and money going out with a woman 8 times when I only need her for 1. Vanessa frowned. I don't think there's any way around it. It's their site, their rules. Very well then, he stated. It's also their loss. They've lost a perfectly good client in me. Mr. Wong crossed his arms over his chest in a gesture of finality. He took a deep breath, his brows furrowed. A few moments passed as he stared into the distance. When he refocused his eyes on Vanessa, he narrowed his gaze, then swept it over her from top to bottom and up again. What about you, Ms. Lim? Huh? Will you be my date to the party? He asked. Me, she squeaked out in disbelief. Why me? You're a safe choice, he remarked. You already know everyone in the office and our colleagues seem to like you, including Mr. Wen. You do get along well with Mr. Wen, correct? Yes, I think so, she replied. He's actually a family friend. Perfect, he declared. It's a win-win all around then. She balked at his remark. You mean a win-win for you? What do I get out of this? If all goes according to plan, he answered, you can say you went on a date with the next partner of this firm. He winked slyly. You're my ticket to a promotion. Vanessa shivered as a chill ran down her back. She should have known there was some slimy personal agenda behind Mr. Wong's plan. That's what this is about? Mr. Wen won't make you partner unless you bring a date to the party? Unfortunately, yes, he answered drolly. He insists I have a work-life balance, specifically something, or rather someone, I value outside of my job. If I bring a date to the party, it'll be the proof he needs that I have the support to take on more responsibilities. It's high time I became a partner, Ms. Lim. I'll do whatever it takes to make it happen. Whatever it takes, huh? Vanessa gulped. Mr. Wang's situation sounded as desperate as hers. But that's what desperate measures were for. And now that Mr. Wang had taken his, perhaps this was the perfect opportunity to take hers, too.
Chapter 5. Philip. I'll agree to be your date, Ms. Lim stated, but on one condition. Ms. Lim peered up at him with a look of desperation mixed with uncertainty. I need you to be mine. Those were the last words Philip expected to hear. You need a date as well. Only a fake one, she emphasized, to my cousin's wedding on New Year's Day. My mom was supposed to go with me, but she had knee surgery and isn't walking well yet. I can't go alone because we already told my aunt there would be 2 of us coming. You know how it is with Chinese banquets and headcounts, or maybe you don't. Anyhow, I need to bring someone to take my mom's place. I understand fully, he replied. My sister had a huge banquet, 30 tables if I recall correctly. A complete waste of money, in my opinion, but she said it was a once-in-a-lifetime event. One that left her with not only a broken heart, but also an empty bank account. Philip clenched his hands into tight fists. If it weren't for him, she and his niece would be living on the street. She sure regretted it after the divorce. Ms. Lim frowned. I'm so sorry to hear that. That's why I don't believe in marriage or love, for that matter. Work, however. That's always been a consistent companion in my life that won't leave me. He surprised himself with how much he was revealing to Ms. Lim. Perhaps it was the fact that they were both in similar, desperate situations. He paused as he considered her deal. Which is why, as much as I dislike weddings, I will agree to your terms. Her eyes brightened. You will, she exclaimed. He nodded, hoping he wouldn't regret this decision. I will. That's great. She offered him a grateful smile. Now I don't have to worry about my mom pairing me up with one of her mahjong buddy sons. What a relief. Philip grimaced. Relief may not have been the right word to use in this scenario. They still needed to get through these 2 dates, in as painless a way as possible. I'm glad it works out for both of us. But, he held up one finger, I would like to set up some ground rules. A contract, if you will. A contract. She repeated. What do you have in mind? First, he stated, this transaction stays between you and me. There is to be no talk of it to anyone inside or outside of this office. Of course. Ms. Lim pinched an index finger and thumb together and moved them across her mouth in a zipping motion. You can trust me to keep this hush-hush. Anything else? Yes. Do you have something presentable to wear to the party? He asked. I would like us to look the part of a polished couple. Presentable. I thought it was okay to wear what we normally wear to the office. He sighed. How did he say this without offending her? I mean specifically that nothing is seen that shouldn't be seen, such as a slip or a price tag. And that every part of your outfit matches. Her cheeks immediately flushed. She lifted her arms to check underneath them, then glanced back at the hem of her skirt. With a look of relief, she released a long breath. Just making sure I look presentable now. Don't worry, Mr. Wang, I'll have my mom double-check my outfit before I leave the house. He gave her a small smile for her effort. Why don't I pick you up on Saturday, he offered, so I can do a triple check. If you insist. I suppose it would be a good opportunity for my mother to meet you, too, before the wedding. She paused, her nose wrinkled in chagrin. I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but she'll want to make sure I'm bringing someone suitable to meet our relatives. There's a bit of rivalry between my mom and her sister about whose family is better. I hate seeing my mom get down about all the comparisons, but it means a lot to her to get my aunt's approval. She's the oldest and a hard one to impress. No need to worry, he assured her. I'm quite popular with Chinese mothers. I have not failed to impress one yet. Ms. Lim widened her eyes and coughed. Good to know. Oh, and about the wedding, I don't expect you to chip in for the gift, in case you were wondering. I wouldn't think of it, he stated. The gift should come from you and your mother since we're not actually dating. Right. He thought he heard her mumble, thank goodness for that. Did you say something? No, nothing. Is that all then? Are we set? Philip rubbed his chin. Something Ms. Lim had said earlier didn't sit right with him. She'd called him handsome. He didn't disagree, of course, but he wondered if her view of him might cause issues on their dates. Better to address the matter now than to have it hanging over their heads. I would like to add a clause to the contract, he stated. That's rather appropriate, she replied. Ms. Lim smiled and pointed to the ceiling as another Christmas song began playing overhead. Get it? Santa Claus is coming to town. He suppressed the urge to roll his eyes, choosing instead to offer a half-hearted chuckle. Her enthusiasm was sort of endearing. There was something very innocent and somewhat cute about Ms. Lim's behavior. She reminded him of his 5-year-old niece when she opened presents on Christmas Day. There you go again with that humor of yours, he remarked. She beamed. I'm glad you appreciate it. I wouldn't go that far, Ms. Lim. The sparkle in her dark brown eyes flickered then disappeared. His heart twinged unexpectedly as he watched her face fall. He shook himself free of the regret tightening his chest. This was no time to be getting soft, he reprimanded himself. He had a deal to strike. Let's stick to the matter at hand. Right, she responded in a flat voice. You were saying? This clause is critical to our contract, he remarked. Okay, she replied expectantly. We must agree, he declared, that there will be no romanticism involved in our dealings. Ms. Lim's face paled. Are you serious? He frowned. Perhaps she was hung up on him more than he realized. He'd have to make things as clear as possible. This is a contractual relationship, Ms. Lim. Regardless of how you feel, you must keep your head and heart free of emotions at all times. If at any moment, you sense you are falling in love with me, you must be truthful and end the deal. Her cheeks were now so bright red, she resembled a tomato. She dropped her head, and her shoulders began to shake violently. When she finally looked up, there was a wet sheen on her eyes. In between her unrestrained snorts, she managed to utter, "That won't be a problem at all." Why, the nerve of this woman. The tears he'd mistaken for disappointment were tears of laughter. He'd never been so insulted in his life. Are you laughing at me? He demanded. No, no. Not at you. Just at your suggestion. She held up her hands as if to shield herself. You don't need to worry. I have no intentions of falling in love with you ever. Don't take it personally, but you're not my type. Not your type? He balked. Don't be ridiculous. I'm everyone's type, he declared with a proud nod. Not if you don't believe in love and marriage, she stated. I want someone who wants a long-term relationship. A man who'll do sweet things, big or small, to show me he cares. That's just not you. Like I said, it's nothing personal. He snickered. She was right, but it still felt like he'd lost an argument. You make a good point, I suppose. I have my moments. She grinned with glee, then stuck out her hand. Now that we have everything out in the open, can we shake on it? She asked. I'm so hungry, my stomach's rumbling. Do we have a deal? Philip sighed. All things considered, Ms. Lim, as ditzy as she was, seemed to be his best bet. Even still, it took him an extra beat to reach for her hand. Fine. Deal. True to Ms. Lim's word, a loud grumble soon sounded from her stomach, surprising them both. Especially Philip. As he clasped her hand, the warmth of her soft skin sent a tingle up his arm. He quickly let go, feeling as if his limbs were on fire. I need to get back to work. You should as well. Apparently, he was the only one affected by their touch. Ms. Lim acknowledged him with a simple nod and made the zipping motion across her lips again. Thanks for you know what. She smiled, then gathered up her belongings in preparation to leave. Philip took a step out of the cubicle and began walking back to his office. His reaction to Ms. Lim's touch bothered him to no end. Had he been single for so long that his body didn't know how to handle being near a woman? That had to be the case. No other explanation made sense. Deep in thought over all that had transpired, he didn't notice the older man standing at the other end of the hallway. He walked straight into him, only raising his head when he heard the familiar, all too jolly voice of his boss. "Jack." "My apologies, sir. I didn't see you." "That's all right," Jack replied. "No harm done." Jack flashed him a look of concern. "You doing all right, Phil?" "I'm great." Phil pushed his worries to the side and squeezed out a confident grin. His number one priority right now was to appear calm, collected, and in control. "I had something on my mind, but it's been resolved. I hope it didn't distract you from eating." "Have you had lunch yet?" Jack asked. "Not yet, but I plan to." "Have you eaten yet, sir?" he greeted him in return, as was customary in their culture. "I'm on my way now." "Don't forget what I said, Phil, about taking lunch away from your desk." The corners of his mouth twitched. He really missed the old Mr. Wen, the one who didn't act like an overbearing Chinese parent. "Right, of course. And make sure you schedule your massage." Philip gritted his teeth. As if he didn't have enough on his to-do list already. "Yes, sir." "Great." Jack gave him a toothy grin. "Now, what about the other item we addressed? Have you made progress on that?" This time it was Philip's turn to smile. "As a matter of fact, I have. I'll be attending the party with Ms. Lim." Jack's face lit up in delight. "Well done, Phil. She's quite the catch." Many words came to mind to describe Ms. Lim, none of which were favorable, but he feigned enthusiasm. "She's something, all right. Treat her well. You're going to need her support," he winked, "when you make partner." Partner. That one word put all of Philip's concerns to rest. His promotion was so close, he could almost taste it. He didn't care what he had to do to get there, he was in it for the long haul. As Jack turned to go, he called out over his shoulder, "Don't forget to invite me to the wedding." The hair on the back of Philip's neck bristled. Wedding? Not a chance. 2 dates, and he and Ms. Lim would be history.
Chapter 6. Vanessa. "Stand up straight, daughter," Vanessa's mother exclaimed. "Put a smile on your face. Your date will be here any minute." Pulling back her shoulders, Vanessa groaned as her mother gave her cheeks a firm pinch. "Ma, I put on makeup already. You're going to leave a mark. It is not every day my daughter goes out with a fancy lawyer. I was so happy when Uncle Wen called to tell me the news." Vanessa groaned inwardly. Word had spread quickly, too quickly in her opinion, about her date with Mr. Wang. Ever since Mr. Wen's phone call, her mother had been pestering Vanessa to stop eating fried foods, lest she break out in pimples. Today, she'd been on her case ever since she woke up about looking her best for the company party. No matter how much she tried to tone down her mother's excitement, it was to no avail. "It's not a big deal. I told you Mr. Wang and I are going as friends." "Friendship is fine to start with," Mrs. Lim touted. "Your father and I were neighbors first. But as soon as I saw he was a hard-working and trustworthy man, I made sure he noticed me. You need to put in some effort if you plan to hold on to this Mr. Wang." She rolled her eyes as she struggled out of her mother's reach. The only thing she would be working hard at was keeping a straight face tonight. She didn't want to experience that man's wrath again. Oh, but it had been so hard not to laugh at him the other day. He was so full of himself. He'd actually thought she could be attracted to him. She fall in love with Philip Wang? The very idea made her snort out loud. "Daughter, please. Control yourself. No man wants to date a woman who sounds like a pig." She stepped back to look Vanessa over from head to toe. "Not bad. Not good either, but it will do for tonight. We will make you look even better for the wedding. Wait until I tell my sister you have caught the eye of such an accomplished man. He must like you to agree to another date even before you go on your first one." Vanessa winced. She had the strongest urge to confess this was all a sham, but she couldn't. Not when it meant disappointing her mother. She hadn't seen her this happy since before her father passed. "Ma, it's nice to see you excited about something, but please don't go planning my wedding yet. I really don't know how things will go tonight or next week. For all I know, Mr. Wong may decide he doesn't want a relationship at all, with me or anyone else." Her mother quirked a brow. "You need to have faith in yourself. You are a smart and hardworking woman. Why, you were on your way to becoming a doctor. But because you are such a good daughter, you gave that up for me. This Mr. Wong would be lucky to have you," she added, giving Vanessa's cheek a soft pat. Vanessa's throat constricted. Her mother's affectionate tone in this one moment touched her more than all the times she'd called her at work to ask if she'd eaten yet. She fought hard to blink back the tears gathering in her eyes. Maybe her mother was getting soft in her old age. Or maybe not. As soon as the doorbell rang, signaling Mr. Wong's arrival, Mrs. Lim's expression turned stern again. She straightened, all 5'1" of herself, and stared straight into Vanessa's eyes. "Now, smile and make a good impression." Vanessa lifted the corners of her mouth with as much enthusiasm as she could muster. "I'll try my best." Mrs. Lim made her way out to the living room of their two-bedroom apartment with Vanessa following closely behind. Her mother moved so quickly, she practically skipped past the mismatched sofas and the photo of her late husband hanging over the fireplace. Vanessa dropped her jaw in shock. Hadn't her mother used a cane only a few minutes ago? "Ma, you're walking so well." "I am?" she remarked. "Oh, I am." Pausing with one hand on the doorknob, Mrs. Lim turned with a sheepish smile. "My knee seems to be feeling better. It must be all the excitement over your date. Come on now, let's not keep Mr. Wong waiting." Vanessa had several questions about this miraculous healing, but she'd have to ask them later. Right now, her mother was all too eager to welcome their visitor. Mrs. Lim opened the front door with a grand flourish. "Mr. Wong. It is so nice to meet you. Vanessa has been looking forward to this date all week." "Thank you, Auntie Lim," Mr. Wong's voice boomed from the doorway, sounding more respectful than usual. "I heard you had knee surgery recently. How are you faring?" "I am feeling much better now that you're here," she gushed. Come in, come in." Vanessa caught a glimpse of Mr. Wong as her mother closed the door and felt her cheeks warm. A sharply dressed man in a dark suit, navy tie, and shiny dress shoes sauntered in. Sauntered was the best word to describe Philip Wong's stride because he looked like he'd walked off the pages of the Chinese edition of GQ. As much as she disliked the guy, she had to admit she felt a little proud to be his date. "Mr. Wong, you look nice." He placed his hands on his hips and nodded smugly. Despite his hair's extra inch of volume tonight, it stayed firmly in place, likely due to a double helping of mousse. His gaze drifted over her once before he spoke. "You don't look so bad yourself, Ms. Lim." "Thanks." Vanessa glanced down at her outfit, a lacy black blouse paired with a dark red pencil skirt. The velvet material of the skirt hugged what little curves she had and showed off her legs, which she hoped would look extra long with her 3-inch heels. With her hair curled and clipped back on both sides, she felt slightly glamorous and more than ready to tackle the night ahead. "Well, I guess we should go," she announced. "One moment." Mrs. Lim rushed in between them on her way to the other side of the room. Once there, she picked up an old camera off the bookshelf. She turned and motioned for them to stand together. "This is such a wonderful occasion. Let me take a picture." Vanessa groaned. What did her mother think this was? Prom? "We really don't have time for pictures, Ma. The hotel's all the way downtown." Mrs. Lim scoffed. "Did you forget who you are? Chinese people are never on time. Come, come. Just one picture." Both of you are dressed so nicely, it would be a shame not to take one. Listen to your mother, Ms. Lim, Mr. Wong urged as he stepped to her side. She is right. I mean we do look good tonight. Vanessa shook her head in disbelief. Maybe she should suggest her mother take a photo of Mr. Wong by himself and send him the copy so he could enlarge and frame it. Despite how handsome he looked, he was still so full of himself. Fine, she said. Just one. What started out as one picture turned into half a dozen more. In the process, Mr. Wong had traded his shoes for a pair of slippers so he could move about the home. At Mrs. Lim's request, they posed on the couch, at the kitchen table, and by the photo of her late husband. This final suggestion pushed Vanessa past the limits of her patience. The last thing she wanted was to disrespect her father's memory. She also wasn't sure how much longer she could fake her smile. Last one, Ma, and then we really need to go. Fine, fine. Let's make it a good one. Mrs. Lim directed them both toward the front door where they stood side by side. Get closer. Put your arms around each other. Ma. Vanessa protested. That's not necessary. Mrs. Lim, Mr. Wong spoke up, is that necessary? Mrs. Lim furrowed her brows at their response. Ow. Oh, my knee, she exclaimed as she limped in place. Hurry, please. I don't know how much longer I can stand. Last picture, I promise. Mr. Wong, who had been surprisingly compliant during the picture taking, looked like he had reached the end of his limits, too. His face flushed as he pursed his lips. Come now, Ms. Lim, one last picture, he urged Vanessa through gritted teeth. He then threw his arm around her and clasped her shoulder, drawing her close. Vanessa gasped. The heat from Mr. Wong's hand seemed to burn its way through her lacy sleeve. Her stomach promptly dropped in a crazy, spine-tingling way. She swallowed hard as the heady masculine scent of his cologne captivated her senses. Her arms flew up as if they had a mind of their own, and circled his waist in a tight embrace. A goofy grin crossed her lips as the camera's flash went off. Just as quickly as he'd drawn close, Mr. Wong fled Vanessa's side and headed straight for the front door. Calling out a word of thanks to Mrs. Lim over his shoulder, he crammed his feet into his shoes and rushed outside. Vanessa barely had time to register all that had happened when the door slammed shut before her. The gust of air that blew over her face both cooled her skin and woke her up to the reality of the situation. Someone sure was eager to get this date over with. She slipped on her heels and grabbed her purse, just as ready for the evening to end. Behind her, Mrs. Lim squealed in delight. Daughter, he is even more handsome than I imagined. She couldn't speak for a moment, her heart was pounding so loudly in her ears. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she thought about how she'd behaved. What was going on? Maybe it was the fact that she hadn't been this close to a man in a very long time. That had to be the explanation for her body's reaction. I guess he's not bad looking, she remarked. Not bad looking? Her mother exclaimed. I dare say he is prettier than you. Mrs. Lim clucked her tongue happily. Well done, daughter. Vanessa sighed. Gone were her mother's warm sentiments from earlier. This was the kind of talk she was used to hearing. Thanks a lot, Ma. Her mother must have missed the sarcasm in her tone because she didn't blink an eye. Waving her out the door, Mrs. Lim called out, Be sure to download these photos for me, so I can send them to my sister. I finally have something to brag to her about. I will, Vanessa replied. Don't wait up for me. These office parties tend to go late. Don't worry about me, her mom replied. Have fun. As Vanessa made her way down the stairs to the ground floor, her confidence sank with each step. Even her mother thought she was out of Mr. Wong's league. Fortunately, this date was a fake one because there was no way the two of them would ever work out in real life, a thought that comforted, yet disheartened, her.
Chapter 7. Philip. Mr. Wong, please wait up, Vanessa called. Philip halted his steps and spun around, hands on his hips. He dug his heels into the plush carpeting of the hotel lobby, sighing as he watched Ms. Lim scramble up a short flight of stairs. He quirked a brow. Those high heels were going to be the death of her, or maybe of him, because his patience had just about worn out. Any day now, Ms. Lim. She shot him a glare when she finally reached his side. I'm trying my best. I'm just not used to walking in such high heels. It would help if you slowed down a little. What's the rush? What's the rush? He spat out with disdain. They were already 20 minutes late to the party, and his so-called date moved as fast as a clown on stilts. At least she didn't look like she belonged in a circus. Surprisingly, Ms. Lim appeared rather presentable tonight. She'd gone to greater lengths than usual to style her hair and outfit. She was almost, dare he say, pretty. But pretty or not, she was a walking disaster. I'm here to make a good impression with Mr. Wen, he declared. I don't expect you to understand this. After all, it's not your career on the line, it's mine. He avoided her gaze for a second, embarrassed at how weak he sounded. He never let his guard down, but it seemed to be a trend around this woman. This was obviously his desperation talking. He cleared his throat and stood up straighter, determined to remain in control of the situation. Her features softened as she studied him. I can see it's a really big deal to you to make partner, she remarked. Has this been your dream for a long time? Philip resumed his long strides toward the ballroom. He didn't have time for chit-chat, especially not with Ms. Lim, whose tone was a little too sweet and caring for his taste. In fact, everything about her made him uncomfortable. The way she'd wrapped her arms around him when they had taken their final photo. The concern in her big brown eyes right now as she waited for an answer. Her very presence was grating on his nerves. Of course, it's been my goal since I started working at the firm, he replied. Haven't I made myself clear? I need this promotion, and I won't stop until I get it. Ms. Lim shuffled her feet quickly to keep up with him. I understand how you feel. I was like that once, she said. I worked my tail off to get into medical school and was so excited to get into the school of my dreams. Being there was so challenging, but also worthwhile. There's just something amazing about being able to do what you love and what you know you're good at. Or at least what you think you'd be good at. His ears picked up on the regret in her last sentence. He slowed his steps. What happened? He asked. Did you have to drop out because you couldn't hack it? She winced. Seriously? Why would you say that? It's an honest question, he answered. I had plenty of friends who couldn't handle med school. You wouldn't be the first one. Philip had reached the doors of the ballroom when he realized Ms. Lim wasn't by his side. He turned around to find her standing 10 feet away, arms crossed over her chest. He blinked, surprised at the anger in her eyes. What's wrong? Her mouth fell open. What's wrong? What's wrong is that I can't believe you think so little of me. I didn't say that, he stated. I said it's common to drop out of med school. Not everyone's cut out to be a doctor. His words obviously didn't assuage her because she stood rooted in place like a firecracker about to combust. Great. What a way to start out their evening. First, he'd had to endure an eternity of her mother's photo taking, and now, this temper tantrum. He had half a mind to pick Ms. Lim up, throw her over his shoulder, and haul her into the party. Will you stop pouting and get over here? Please, he added in a last-ditch effort to play nice. He swung the door open and gestured for her to enter. Narrowing her eyes, she stomped toward him. When they were face to face, she lifted her chin and held his gaze. For your information, I didn't drop out of Harvard Medical School because I couldn't handle it. I was at the top of my class. I only left because my father got sick. And after he passed away, I made the choice to stay home to take care of my mother. I was cut out to be a doctor, a good one, too. He shrugged, surprised to hear her answer but confused as to why she was so upset. So, I guessed wrong. Ms. Lim threw her hands in the air. That's all you have to say? She exclaimed. You don't get it, do you? You guessed wrong because you don't care to listen. What happened to being innocent until proven guilty? You really should take the time to get to know someone before jumping to conclusions. With those words, she strode through the door without a backward glance. Philip stood in stunned silence. No one outside a courtroom, and certainly no woman, had ever talked to him like this before. He scratched his head, unsure of what to make of it. To his surprise, instead of being irritated at Ms. Lim, amusement began bubbling up within him. A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth as he thought of her pouty red lips. And that fire in her eyes when she'd told him off, that was a sight to see. This side of her piqued his interest. Traces of her floral perfume drew his attention as well, urging him to follow. Inside the ballroom, the happy strains of a holiday song boomed from a speaker in the corner. Colorful lights were strung along the walls, as well as on a tall Christmas tree standing on one side of the room. The tree was also decorated with tinsel and ornaments in a bold red shade, the Chinese color for luck. Several long tables with aluminum trays of Chinese cuisine lined the other side of the room. There were about a dozen small round tables set up with red tablecloths and candles flickering in their holders. Most of their colleagues were seated already, eating and chatting with one another. Philip caught up to Ms. Lim and stepped in front of her. I see you finally decided to pick up the pace. Cheeks still flushed with indignation, she crossed her arms and stepped around him. She chose to ignore him and scan the room instead. When she spotted a blonde woman at a nearby table, she waved and began walking over in her direction. Hey, where are you going? Philip called after her. Ms. Lim paused and turned around. To say hi to Bryn. That's what friends do when they see each other. But I doubt you'd understand this bit of common courtesy since you don't have any friends. Her comment took him aback. This feisty side of Ms. Lim was starting to grate on his nerves. Surely, if she were a child, she'd be grounded by now for her poor attitude. I do have friends. How could you? She asked. You would actually have to value someone above yourself. His hands clenched. You have no right to comment about my personal life like that. You're crossing a dangerous line, Ms. Lim. Oh, you have no idea. She bristled. I told myself this whole week to play nice and put up with your rude and judgmental attitude, but that was before you insulted my intelligence. I may not always look as put together as you, but underneath all of this, she gestured at herself, is a great brain. If you made the effort to talk to me instead of at me, you'd know that. Her voice wavered with emotion as she glanced at the exit. I cannot wait for this night to be over. Philip scoffed. You and me both. He took a deep breath and attempted to rein in his annoyance. It wouldn't do any good to upset Ms. Lim even more and risk her leaving the party early. Not when he was so close to securing his promotion. He shook off his frustration and stepped close to her. Lowering his voice, he reminded her, but first, we must accomplish what we came here to do. You can socialize later. Right now, we need to find Mr. Wen and make a good impression. Fine. She sighed. But I'm hungry. Can we at least get some food first? Philip was too busy scanning the room for his boss to heed her request. He didn't have to search for long because Jack spotted him first. The middle-aged man dressed in a white suit waved as he approached. Ms. Lim, Philip whispered out of the corner of his mouth, this is it. Mr. Wen's coming. Play your part. He thought he heard her mutter, desperate times, desperate measures, under her breath before she pasted on a smile. Phil. Vanessa. It's so good to see you here together, Jack emphasized with a wink. How are you doing? Good, Jack, Philip replied. And you? I'm doing well, thank you. Jack turned to Ms. Lim and remarked, you look beautiful, dear, so much like your mother. Ms. Lim's smile widened into a real one. Thank you, Uncle Wen. That's kind of you to say so. My mother asked me to send her regards. He nodded enthusiastically. I hear she is feeling better. She tells me every time we talk how good you are to her. Ms. Lim blushed. It's no big deal. I do what I can. No need to be so modest, he remarked. It is a great fortune to have a daughter like you. Not to mention, a girlfriend like you. Jack clapped Philip on the shoulder. You must be taking good care of Phil here, as well. A man like him needs a strong and faithful woman by his side, someone who will support and care for him. Ms. Lim eyed Philip warily. I'd have to agree, she stated. Mr. Wong needs a lot of help, that's for sure. Mr. Wong. Why, there's no need to be so formal, Jack balked. We're not at work. Even if we were, you are more than welcome to address each other by your first names. Or a pet name, if you so choose. Tell me, what do you call each other in private? Philip and Ms. Lim exchanged glances and both squeaked out at the same time, in private. Yes, when you two are not in the office, Jack replied. My ex-wife used to call me Lao Gong and I would call her Lao Po. Those fun terms of endearment like old man and old wife can be especially sweet. What do you two use? Well, Philip began, racking his brain for an answer. The thing is, Ms. Lim, Vanessa, and I haven't been dating very long. We're still getting used to one another. That was an understatement if he'd ever heard one. We hardly know each other well enough to be using nicknames, Vanessa chimed in. Why, we haven't even held hands or kissed yet. Philip blinked quickly, not believing his ears. What was she doing, bringing up the idea of such intimate gestures? Had she forgotten the clause to their agreement? He shot Vanessa a stern look and wiggled both eyebrows for emphasis. And we will not be doing either of those anytime soon, will we? He remarked. I wouldn't think of it, dear, Vanessa cooed back, her tone overtly sweet. I know how much you like your personal space since you're used to being alone all the time. No wonder your communication skills could use some work. What in the world was she doing? Philip noticed Jack staring at them curiously. He had to remedy the situation before Vanessa blew their cover. He motioned with one index finger for her to step aside. Give us a moment, please, he informed Jack with an apologetic smile. I forgot there was something I needed to tell Vanessa. When they had walked out of earshot, Philip let her have a piece of his mind. What's gotten into you? Have you forgotten about our contract? You agreed to be my girlfriend, so I expect you to act like one. You said you needed a date. She exclaimed. Now I have to be your doting girlfriend. Mr. Wen referred to you as one, so yes, he declared. You're supposed to be the supportive woman by my side. How you behaved back there was anything but. Any woman who would willingly agree to go out with me would speak more respectfully. Or do you not understand common courtesy, Ms. Lim? Philip knew he had touched a nerve when her nostrils flared. Touché. Two could play this game. We have an agreement, he stated. You scratch my back, and I scratch yours. Don't forget. The intensity in her eyes flared. After a tense moment of silence, she finally spoke. Fine. If a doting girlfriend is what you want, a doting girlfriend is what you'll get. And with those words, she did the last thing Philip expected. Vanessa grabbed his hand and latched onto his arm like a leech. She flashed him a sugary smile and dragged him back in the direction of their boss.
Chapter 8. Vanessa. What are you doing? Philip hissed out of the corner of his mouth as they made their way across the ballroom floor. Exactly what you asked me to do. I'm helping you secure your promotion. Vanessa batted her eyelashes at him, a thrill zipping through her body. She didn't know what had gotten into her to behave so out of character. Here she was hanging on to Philip Wong's arm for dear life, as if she couldn't get enough of the man. It didn't hurt that his bicep was surprisingly toned and maybe even kind of sexy. The truth was, she'd discovered she really liked seeing him in the hot seat. And if holding his hand had the power to do that, she wasn't letting go. Not even if the throbbing vein in his temple burst, which it appeared to be on the verge of doing. She'd had enough of Philip Wong's boorish personality. She'd been biting her tongue the entire week, not to mention, the past few years, trying to appease him. But no more. She could handle him insulting her appearance, but her intelligence was another matter. Not that it should matter what he thought of her, she reasoned to herself, but for some strange reason it did. When they reached Mr. One, he greeted them with a delighted smile. He nodded toward their joined hands and gave them a thumbs up. I see things are moving along well for you too. And so quickly, too. I wish I had taken the time to hold my ex-wife's hand more often. Perhaps then we wouldn't have fought so much. For a second, guilt assaulted Vanessa's conscience. How could she fool their boss like this? He genuinely seemed happy and hopeful for their so-called budding relationship. If he could only feel the cold sweat dripping from Philip's hand. The only thing budding here was fear. But if this charade made Mr. One smile in the process of making Philip's dream come true, she'd milk it for all it's worth. That's such sage advice, Uncle One. It's much harder to think or say something negative about your partner when you're sharing a part of yourself with him. She held up Philip's hand as if it were a trophy and gave him a sweet smile. The wide-eyed look he offered in return made her giddy. This was too much fun. Isn't that right, baby? Philip's Adam's apple bobbed up and down as he swallowed. He muttered. I think we should hold hands all the time, Vanessa added playfully. She then proceeded to lean into Philip and rest her head upon his firm chest. His body stiffened considerably upon contact. Oh, he was probably going to sweat through his suit jacket before the end of the night. She tilted her head up to gaze into his eyes, expecting to see fear. His pupils were dilated as she predicted, but there was a tenderness in them that she didn't recognize. A small smile played on his lips as he zeroed in on her mouth and back to her eyes again. Now it was her turn to swallow, hard. Right, Philip replied, this time with more certainty. Vanessa wasn't sure what was stranger, the idea that Philip might kiss her right then and there, in front of their boss, or that she wanted him to. Perhaps all this role-playing was fooling her heart, too. This is so wonderful to see, Jack cut in, disrupting the intimacy of the moment. A smart man knows to listen to his woman. I think you are more than ready to become a partner, philosophy. The word partner woke Philip up from his stupor. He shook free from Vanessa, his face and voice coming to life again. You're serious, Jack? You're offering me the position? Of course, I'm serious, Mr. One exclaimed. I've decided to retire come January, so this is perfect timing. It's time to hand off the baton to someone younger and wiser than me. He nodded toward Vanessa. I hope you will do your part to ensure Phil doesn't go down the same road I did. I would like to see him live a long, healthy, and happy life. He will need you by his side in the years to come to succeed. Vanessa's smile faltered. She had to admit, part of her did want to see him succeed, too. She understood the disappointment of watching a dream slip out of your hands all too well, and she'd never wish that upon anyone. But to agree to help make that happen in the long run? That was crazy talk, even crazier than her desire to kiss him, which she now blamed on a momentary bout of insanity. She remained silent, hoping to plead the fifth. Vanessa? Darn. Mr. One wouldn't let the issue drop. Vanessa bit her lower lip, hoping Philip would jump in and rescue her. Many years is a long time, she stated. It's not wise to make promises when we don't know what the future holds. We can only take it seriously, Philip cut in. We must take the commitment we made to each other seriously. We must not forget that. His firm tone spoke volumes. She was supposed to stick to their plan. But the contract they agreed to was for her to be Philip's date, not his girlfriend, especially not a long-term, marry me. Philip exclaimed. Vanessa froze. What in the world? She must have heard him wrong. After all, her heart was beating so loudly in her ears, it sounded like the bang of a judge's gavel pounding down to deliver her sentence. Her death sentence. Because she thought Philip Wong had just asked her to marry him. Marry me, Vanessa. Oh, no. There were those words again, dangling in the air between her and Philip like a noose. She turned to face him, certain he would burst out laughing any minute and call this an April Fool's joke, even though it was the middle of winter. What? Are you crazy? There was a wild look in his eyes, but his voice remained steady. Your partnership in life will ensure my partnership in the firm. It would be crazy not to propose. Now it was his turn to plead insanity. What kind of person would be willing to sacrifice his personal life for his professional one? On second thought, Philip Wong was just the person to do so. He didn't care about the sanctity of marriage, much less true love. He only wanted his way, and he wanted to drag her down with him. Vanessa's stomach turned, filling her with dread. She couldn't sign away her life like this. But what could she do? Mr. Wynne was staring at her with hope-filled eyes, his cheeks rosy with excitement. Even worse, a crowd had gathered around them, curious as to why Philip Wong had suddenly dropped to one knee. Her eyes panned the room to the familiar faces of her colleagues, all of them with their jaws dropped. Her friend Bryn stared at her with the most confused expression of all, which surely mirrored her own. Next, she noticed Mr. Wynne fiddling with his phone. He held it up at eye level before turning the screen toward Vanessa. From her vantage point, she saw the familiar face of an older Chinese woman with a toothy grin. She gulped. Mr. Wynne had dialed her mother and put her on a video call. Ma? Vanessa managed to utter through her mortification. Daughter. Mrs. Lim's jubilant voice came through the phone. What are you waiting for? Say yes. It will make me so happy. Mr. Wynne chimed in as well. He motioned for the crowd to join in, and soon they were all chanting, say yes. Say yes. All Vanessa wanted to say was no, never. Every fiber of her being screamed it. There was no way she'd ever agree to marry this man. She'd have to be desperate or insane, or both, to accept his proposal. But how could she stop this nonsense? She dropped to her knees to join Philip. The rough fibers of the carpet likely damaged her pantyhose, but she didn't care. There were more important matters at hand, like finding out what crazy prank her so-called date was trying to pull off. The crowd continued to chant, forcing her to lean in and whisper in Philip's ear to be heard. The fragrance of his cologne once again assaulted her senses, rendering her speechless. Focus. She couldn't afford to be distracted. What do you think you're doing? She asked. This was not part of the deal. It is now, he replied in a hushed tone, but only until Mr. Wynne retires. When he leaves the firm, we will end the engagement and go our separate ways. Vanessa didn't feel the least bit relieved. A fake date was one thing, but a fake engagement? I can't go along with this. It's not right to fool everyone, including my mother. He balked. It's a little late for your conscience to be talking. We already fooled everyone into thinking we're dating. What's the harm in taking it a step further? I am this close to securing my promotion. His warm breath tickled her lobe, causing her stomach to drop. And she was this close to losing her mind. She pulled back to create some distance between them. That's when she noticed the desperation in Philip's eyes. Vanessa, he pled, his voice raw with emotion, you said you understood what it was like to chase after your dream, to do what you're good at. This is my dream, what I'm good at. Please help me fulfill mine. Philip's rare display of vulnerability got to her. Compassion replaced her anger, and this new emotion tipped her over the edge. The logical side of her brain shut down. Her heart took over and prompted her to nod her head, slowly but surely. She reasoned that this charade would benefit herself as much as it would help Philip. First of all, she wanted to please her mother and make her proud. Second, showing up as an engaged woman to her cousin's wedding would bolster her reputation among their relatives. Third, she couldn't think of a third reason, but the first one was reason enough. Okay, she managed to utter over the pounding of her heart, yes. She said yes. Bryn called out. A round of applause and cheers immediately followed as their colleagues gathered around to congratulate them. What is happening? Mrs. Lim's voice screeched over the noise of the crowd. Did you say yes? I can't hear you, daughter. Speak up. Vanessa glanced to her right, where Mr. Wen was holding his phone up to her face. Her mother's image was still on display, but it appeared to be shifting up and down. She squinted at the screen, wondering if her eyes were deceiving her. Ma, are you jumping? What about your knee? I feel great. She shouted. I'm fully recovered. Did you say yes? She gave a reluctant nod. Wait until my sister finds out. Wait, so you can go to the wedding with me, she asked. Of course not. Her mother replied. You must bring Philip. Everyone will want to meet your handsome and successful fiancé. Fiancé. Vanessa released a shaky breath. This wasn't the kind of proposal she ever imagined having. There was no beautiful ring to show off, no heartfelt speech to tell of. The only thing present was the element of surprise. For when she looked into Philip's dark brown eyes, the absolute joy she saw there sparked something within her. Something strong, lovely, and sure, but, according to their contract's clause, forbidden. It was time to plead guilty because she was falling for Philip Wong.
Chapter 9. Philip. Mr. Wong, congratulations on your engagement. Any idea on when the big day will be? Philip offered a curt nod to the paralegal, grinning at him as he passed her cubicle. Thank you. Not yet, but Vanessa and I are working out the details, he added before walking away. If anyone had told him a week ago that he'd become one of the most popular people at work, he would never have believed it. However, here he was, the talk of the town, or rather, the office. Colleagues he'd barely spoken to in the past now paid attention to him. Instead of avoiding his gaze, they tried to strike up conversations. Since the Christmas party, he'd become almost as well liked as Santa. And it was all because of Mrs. Claus, his Mrs. Claus. It was strange to think of Ms. Lim as his anything, but they were now a unit in everyone's eyes. The upside of this: he was innocent by association. People who liked Ms. Lim liked him as well. And for the first time in his life, he got a taste of what it was like to have friends. He found himself enjoying this sense of belonging. No wonder Ms. Lim spent so much time socializing with their co-workers. Even now, as he neared her cubicle, he found her chatting away with her friend again. Their voices were too low to be heard, but from the shocked look on Bryn's face, it looked to be an intense discussion. They didn't even hear his footsteps as he approached. Philip cleared his throat to catch their attention. Oh, Philip. Hi. Ms. Lim's cheeks flushed as she rolled her chair away from her friends. She flashed him a tight smile and remarked, I emailed you the document you asked for this morning. Did you need something else? Before Philip could answer, Bryn shot him a knowing grin. You sly dog. It all makes sense now. She stood and waved at Vanessa. I'll catch you later, Ness. Philip eyed Bryn's quick steps as she returned to her cubicle. What was that haughty tone about? Slightly perturbed, he spun around to ask Ms. Lim and found her complexion even rosier than a second ago. He narrowed his eyes. He knew a guilty look when he saw one. Can we speak in private? He asked. Her eyes grew wide. Why? There's something I would like to discuss with you, he insisted firmly, in private. Okay, sure. Ms. Lim chewed her lower lip as she followed him to his office. He shut the door behind her and sat down at his desk. With a strained smile, she sat down across from him. What's on your mind, Mr. Wong? Did you tell Bryn about our contract? No, of course not, she balked, her brows furrowed. I'm a woman of my word. I know how much is at stake for you. I didn't tell anyone about our agreement. Then what was all that nonsense about? He asked. She said it makes sense now. What was she referring to? Oh, that. Mainly, our relationship. She was just asking some silly questions, she rushed on to explain. It was hard for her to wrap her head around everything that's happened this week. Are you implying she couldn't understand why you would find me attractive? No, not that, she replied. We both agree you're handsome. She gulped, her cheeks reddening again. She pulled at the collar of her turtleneck sweater. Did they turn up the heat in here? It's the middle of winter, he stated, so likely, yes. Philip eyed her, not reassured by her dodgy answers. So, what is she so curious or uncertain about? Well, the fact that I would find your inside attractive. My inside. She blew out a long breath. Don't take this the wrong way, but she was wondering what other qualities I find appealing about you. Appealing enough to want to marry you. Heat rushed up his neck. Now it was his turn to flush. What an absurd question. I have many positive qualities. My educational background. My financial stability. And now, my new position within this firm. Are those not enough? Her mouth broke into a smile. They're enough if you're trying to impress an Asian mom or find matches on a dating site. But most women want more than that, she stated. We want a man with an attractive personality. A personality? I have one of those. She chuckled softly. I know you do. I told Bryn you can be quite funny when you choose to be. That's true, he agreed. I do have a sense of humor. He leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers together, feeling satisfied. Surprisingly, it felt good to be complimented for something other than his accomplishments. Go on, what else did you tell her? He asked. That you have a very healthy dose of confidence, which she already knew about. She rolled her eyes with that statement. But underneath all of the toughness you show to others is a soft heart longing for approval. That's the part that appealed to me the most. Philip dropped his hands into his lap. What utter nonsense. No part of him was soft, especially not his heart. It had hardened long ago when he got dumped, and it continued to harden with each divorce case he handled. For some reason, being around Ms. Lim threw him off and made him do things he normally wouldn't do. Like practically beg her to marry him. I don't know what you're talking about. It's okay if you don't want to show that side around the office. It probably wouldn't do much to help your reputation as Mr. Hotshot divorce attorney if people knew you actually had feelings. He bristled. I hope you didn't say those things to your friend. Don't worry. She bit back a smile. I didn't make you sound like you have a heart, at least not a big one. Then what did you say? He had to admit he was curious. What had she said to her friend that would have made sense? I said it was my father's dying wish to see me settle down, and that I'm keeping the promise I made to him. That promise, is it true? It is. She sighed. I said I'm a woman of my word, and I am. I would never break a promise I made. She dropped her eyes and bit her lower lip before meeting his gaze again. Which is why I need to back out of our contract. What are you talking about? The wedding's tomorrow. You completed your part of the agreement, now it's time for me to complete mine. His eyebrows shot up as a memory surfaced. Does this have something to do with our clause? Yes, I mean no. She frowned. It appears my mother went a little overboard in her excitement over our, she held up 4 fingers to make air quotes, engagement, and told my aunt an elaborate story about how we met and fell in love. And what does this have to do with the clause? He asked. You said there was to be no romanticism involved in our dealings. But with the way my mother's dressed up our story, my aunt will expect us to behave like we're, she winced together. Together, he repeated. You know, she began, do things like real couples do, such as holding hands. I see. He raised a brow at this interesting turn of events. And what happens if we don't do those things? Aunt Winnie will call my mother a liar. She's already doubting whether this engagement is real, considering how fast it happened. Philip pursed his lips. This aunt of hers sounded like a real piece of work. That's ridiculous, he remarked. People have whirlwind romances all the time. That's why many of them end up in my office once they come to their senses. Which is precisely why she's skeptical. She wants to be sure we really like each other. And that I'm not after you for your money, she added with a smirk. He scoffed. How insulting. What kind of man does she think I am? I'm smart enough to know when a woman is toying with my affections. Your aunt hasn't even met me yet. She has no right to make these judgments about me, or you, for that matter. Silence fell on the room until a chuckle escaped Vanessa's lips. Soon, her laughter filled the entire office. In between gasps for air, she touted, "It sounds like someone's getting a taste of their own medicine." At first, Philip balked at her words. How dare she put him and Aunt Winnie in the same category? Soon, however, he saw the irony of the situation. Leave it to his fiancée to point out something so blatantly obvious. Only she possessed the fortitude to confront him with the truth. Wait a minute. Had he referred to Vanessa as his fiancée? It was an innocent mistake. Their colleagues had been talking so much about their engagement that his mind had gone down that rabbit hole as well. It wasn't like their relationship was real. In a matter of weeks, or possibly days, they would be going their separate ways. The realization hit him hard. He fell silent as he regarded Vanessa. It was wonderful to see her so carefree, laughing at what she probably considered her funniest line to date. Philip found it hard not to smile himself. I'll admit it. I deserved that. She beamed. I like it that you can laugh at yourself. Trust me, this isn't a regular thing. You seem to bring that out in me. Their eyes locked, and Philip had to work to tear his eyes away. The moment was a little too real and intimate for his liking. What had they been talking about? The clause, "I can see why you feel the need to end the contract." She nodded. I figured out another plan though. I'll tell everyone you're not feeling well and couldn't make the wedding. But I'll show them my engagement ring, and they'll be too busy owing and ahhing over that to mind your absence. Your engagement ring? I didn't give you one. Oh, I don't expect you to, she quickly rushed on. I'll wear my mom's. I'll have to sneak it out of her jewelry box, but she won't miss it. She'll be gone all day playing mahjong with her friends. An unfamiliar feeling settled in his stomach. Hearing that Ms. Lim had figured it all out without him made him oddly disappointed. After all they'd been through, he felt responsible to help her accomplish her task. I'm a man of my word, too, Ms. Lim. I said I'll be your date to your cousin's wedding, and I will. Are you sure? He nodded firmly. It would be my pleasure. I'd also like to put this aunt of yours in her place. She released a happy sigh. If anyone can do that, it'll be you. Thank you, Mr. Wong. This means so much to me and my mother. You have no idea. Actually, he did have an inkling of the relief she felt because he felt it too when she smiled. Several other emotions stirred in his heart as well. Namely, peace, curiosity, and surprise. For if he were honest with himself, he'd admit he was looking forward to holding Miss Lim's hand again tomorrow.
Chapter 10. Vanessa. There's no need to worry, Philip reassured her. We've gone through the details numerous times. Vanessa glanced over at her date as he sat in the driver's seat of his fancy car. They were on their way to her cousin's wedding being held at a country club an hour outside the city. Their surroundings had changed from tall buildings to packed freeways to acres of golf courses. The lush green grass was a sight to see, especially for someone used to steel and glass on a daily basis, but Philip Wong was the only thing capturing her attention. He looked even more amazing today than he had at the company party. Hopefully her aunt would swallow her tongue when she spotted her date and the planes of his taut abs under his dark blue suit. Then she wouldn't be able to interrogate him. Vanessa sighed. You haven't met Aunt Winnie. All our relatives say she should have become a lawyer instead of opening a laundromat. She's like a hawk. She doesn't miss a thing you say or do. Philip scoffed. She's got nothing on me. She'll be the one hanging out to dry by the end of the day. Pun intended. Her stomach fluttered in response to the wink he gave her. In some strange, very unexpected way, Philip had grown a lot more attractive than she'd given him credit for. She didn't have to fib, apart from the details concerning their contract, when she told Bryn why she'd accepted his proposal. She really did find this man endearing. Which is why she'd tried to stop him from accompanying her today. The reason she'd given him was partly true: her mother had said too much to her aunt. Explaining the situation in those terms seemed like a better idea than admitting she had feelings for him. Oh, she could never reveal that to Philip, but she could act on them for just a day. Even if it was all pretend, she looked forward to having a fiancé for a day and putting her aunt in her place. "Thank you again for doing this," she said to him. "It's a lot to ask of you. You can be sure I gave my mother a piece of my mind for putting you on the spot like this. It's just that she really likes you, and the whole idea of me finding someone like you." He waved off her words. "I'm happy to fulfill my part of the contract. It's because of you, our team effort, that I made partner. I signed all the paperwork yesterday. Mr. Wen is arranging for the office to have a farewell/congratulatory party for him and me next week." "That's wonderful," she stated. "I'm really happy for you." As much as it pained her to see their agreement come to an end, she knew she'd have to face reality someday. When they pulled up in front of a large white building at the end of the manicured lawn, Vanessa released a heavy sigh. It was time to face her toughest judge. As they waited in line for the valet attendant, she scanned the area for her aunt. Soon enough, she spotted her walking up the steps with her 2 daughters in tow. They were dressed to the nines with sequined floor-length dresses, elaborate updos, and shiny jewelry. Groaning, she tapped softly on her passenger side window. "There's Aunt Winnie and my cousins. They all look so pretty. I can't compare to them. Hey, look at me." Philip's voice was low and commanding, but there was a softness in his eyes. "You can clearly tell a mile away that their jewels are fake, as are they. You look just as beautiful, if not more. Especially after you put this on." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a black velvet box. He opened it to reveal a sparkly diamond ring at least 2 carats in size. He removed it from the box, then gestured for her hand. Vanessa gasped. "What's that?" "A ring. Which is supposed to go on your finger," he remarked with a wry smile as he lifted her hand from her lap. "Let's see if it fits." She tried her best to keep from trembling, but his touch sent shivers up her entire arm. She couldn't decide what she preferred more on her skin, the ring or his hand. On second thought, it was most definitely the latter. She melted a little inside as he slipped the silver band onto her finger oh so gently. "It's a perfect fit. I don't understand. Where did you get this?" His eyes darkened. "It was meant for someone a long time ago," he murmured, "when I still believed in things like love. At least it'll be put to good use today." Vanessa winced at the sadness in his voice. This explained a lot about Philip and the prickly side of him. She wondered how any woman could have hurt him. There was no time to ask questions though, so she offered him a sympathetic smile. "I'm sorry it didn't work out. If it's any consolation, it was her loss." "Thanks. I appreciate that." Before he could say more, the valet attendant knocked on the driver's window and motioned for them to exit. "Come on," he declared. "It's showtime." Philip got out and rounded the car to reach her side. He opened the door and offered his hand to help her out. She took it and rose, smoothing out her burgundy dress in the process. She had on the same pair of heels she'd worn to the company party and had her hair curled in the same style. Her outfit couldn't compare to those of her cousins, except for the bling on her hand that would help her stand out. She couldn't believe how generous and thoughtful Philip was in lending the ring to her. It wouldn't be hard to feign interest in her date, she was already starry-eyed over him. As they walked up the steps, she realized he was still holding her hand. Their palms melded into each other's so naturally, as if they did this every day. Oh, what wishful thinking on her part. The only thing she should be holding was her heart back from falling more in love with her fake fiancé. This was the only thought on her mind as they took their seats in the ballroom. That is, when she wasn't dwelling on the fact that Philip hadn't stopped touching her since they'd arrived. When he did let go of her hand, it was only for a moment as he reached over to place an arm around her shoulders. The heat from his body made it hard to breathe during the ceremony. It came as a surprise when he pulled her to her feet, drawing her attention to the bride and groom as they began walking down the middle aisle. "It's over," she whispered to Philip. "That was fast." "Fast?" he exclaimed. "We were sitting for half an hour. I need some fresh air." He took her hand again and led her outside. As they stepped into the courtyard, the sun broke through the clouds, lighting up the overcast winter sky. The area was beautifully decorated with several standing tables draped in white tablecloths and tied with large gold bows. A row of poinsettias lining a stone wall added some color and Christmas spirit to the venue. An attendant dressed in a black tuxedo approached them with drinks and hors d'oeuvres. Philip took 2 glasses of champagne and handed one to Vanessa. After taking a sip, he uttered, "Much better." She eyed him with concern. "I get it now why you're not a fan of weddings." "Who said I wasn't?" He took another drink, a long gulp, and downed his glass. "At least this one went off without a hitch. The bride showed up, which is a good thing." "Ouch. Is that what happened?" she hesitated. "To you?" "She said I was already married to my work, so I didn't need to marry her." He shrugged. "It was for the best. I would have hated ending up like one of my clients." She rubbed her thumb along his hand, trying to convey through her touch what she didn't know how to say with words. Poor Philip. Love had disappointed him so much. She held out her full glass in exchange for his empty one. "I think you need this more than me." His features softened. For a moment, he looked like a lost little boy. "At least I won't ever have to face that scenario again," he stated. Vanessa caught a glimpse of his vulnerability again, and her heart ached in response. She longed to wrap her arms around him and hold him, but that would be crossing too many lines, even with their role-playing today. Instead, she leaned into him and laid her head on his shoulder. The click-clack of high heels suddenly approached, sending the two of them flying apart. Vanessa turned and came face to face with Aunt Winnie and all 5 feet of her bristly attitude. Oh man, she should have kept that glass of alcohol for herself. She longed to numb herself with the barrage of questions sure to come her way. "Auntie Winnie. How are you?" Aunt Winnie looked Vanessa up and down, then did the same to Philip. Her perfectly colored and eyebrows arched into sharp peaks. Even from her height, she managed to stare down at them over the frames of her glasses. She took a mini egg roll from the plate in her hand and stuffed it into her mouth. Once she'd swallowed, she remarked, "Vanessa, aren't you going to introduce me to your boyfriend?" Philip handed his glass to a passing server, then reached for Aunt Winnie's hand, clasping it between both of his. With his game face on, he flashed her his brightest smile. "It is such a pleasure to meet you, Aunt Winnie. I've heard so much about you. I'm Philip Wong, graduate of Harvard Law School, with honors, partner at Wong, Chen, and Lon, and most importantly, Vanessa's fiancé." He dropped her hand and picked up Vanessa's again. "Soon, I will have another title as Aunt Winnie's nephew-in-law. It has a nice ring to it, don't you agree?" One corner of Aunt Winnie's mouth curved up, threatening to turn into a full-blown smile. She tamped down her obvious fascination with Philip's introduction and narrowed her eyes. "We shall see about that. Tell me, how long have you been interested in our Vanessa?" Vanessa tried her hardest not to roll her eyes. Leave it to Aunt Winnie to play both good cop and bad cop. She looked expectantly at Philip, hoping he remembered all the answers to the questions she'd prepped him for. "For several years now, actually. She caught my eye when she first started at the firm, but it took me a while to get to know her. I don't blame her for the delay, it was simply our workloads that got in the way. More recently, however, we had the opportunity to spend time together as we worked on some of the same cases. The more we talked, the more apparent it was that we got along well. Soon after, I asked her out. Our feelings grew, and we realized we want to spend the rest of our lives together. He raised Vanessa's left hand and held it, and the impressive diamond, up for Aunt Winnie to see. The day she said yes was the happiest day of my life. His playful grin boosted Vanessa's confidence and made her heart pound. She shouldn't have doubted Philip at all. He was doing well holding his ground, even injecting extra charm into his answers. Vanessa added some of her own words to the mix. We had talked about marriage, but it was still such a surprise when Philip proposed. As you can imagine, I couldn't turn him, or this ring, down. Isn't it beautiful? Vanessa wiggled her fingers under Aunt Winnie's nose. She had to admit she was enjoying this charade a little too much, especially when her aunt's eyes grew wide with envy. Her complexion may have even turned a light shade of green. Aunt Winnie waved Vanessa's hand away and pushed her lips into a thin line. It's not bad. But I've seen bigger. I can assure you the size of the diamond is not equivalent to my affection for Vanessa, Philip cut in. Why, there is no stone large enough to convey how I feel about her. Vanessa's body warmed to hear such lovely sentiments flow from Philip's mouth. She almost believed them to be true, but she reminded herself not to get carried away. They had a job to do. Their number one goal, to impress her aunt. True to his word, Philip was well on his way to accomplishing this. She stared up at him, intrigued and impressed. Was there nothing this man couldn't do? Perhaps the only thing, she sadly realized, was falling in love.
Chapter 11. Philip. Humph, Aunt Winnie scoffed. Philip watched with glee as Vanessa's aunt gave him the evil eye he'd often seen his clients give one another when surrendering after a heated discussion. With nothing left to say, Aunt Winnie snatched another item off her plate, a deep-fried shrimp ball, and threw it into her mouth. From the shock on Vanessa's face, he bet she'd never seen her aunt speechless before. Likely no one in her family had ever stood up to this woman like he had. His time in the courtroom had taught him well. One's ability to remain calm under pressure had the power to ruffle a person's feathers more than mere words could. Philip flashed a triumphant grin at Vanessa, which she gratefully returned. He felt so giddy at their victory that he did the most unexpected thing, surprising them both. With a swift turn of his arm, he swung her out to the side, then pulled her back to him, spinning her in the process. Vanessa's feet moved with ease, as if under his tutelage. When they were face to face, he moved his hand to her back, cradling it. "See how well we move together, Auntie," he called out over his shoulder. Lowering his voice, he murmured to Vanessa, "Great work, partner." Half a dozen different emotions flickered on Vanessa's face as she caught her breath. She probably thought it strange that he knew how to dance, or maybe she was relieved she hadn't dropped her glass, he couldn't be sure. All he knew was that an odd fluttering sensation grew in his stomach to be so close to this woman. Who knew a fake fiancé could reawaken his heart and tempt him with thoughts of love? Philip fought to understand the emotion surging through his body, but a strange, gurgling sound beside them caught his attention. Vanessa pulled back from their embrace and screamed, "Aunt Winnie. Oh my goodness, Philip, she's choking." He turned to his left and saw that Vanessa was indeed correct. There stood her red-faced aunt, flapping one arm wildly about as she clutched her throat with the other. Before he could react, Vanessa handed him her glass, then ran behind her aunt and wrapped her arms around her plump midsection. With one hand in a fist and the other wrapped around it, she gave a couple of quick upward thrusts into Auntie Winnie's belly. Whoosh! A pink blob shot out of Aunt Winnie's mouth and promptly landed in Vanessa's champagne glass with a splash. Aunt Winnie broke out in a fit of coughs, rubbing her stomach and crying out in pain. "What did you do? Were you trying to kill me, Vanessa?" By now, several bystanders had gathered around them. They murmured among themselves, wondering what the commotion was about. Vanessa rubbed her aunt's back, all the while explaining what had happened to her in their native tongue. Part of the shrimp ball you ate went down your airway and got stuck. But I dislodged it with the Heimlich maneuver. The pressing motion I made on your stomach pushed the food out. You're okay now. Okay. Auntie Winnie yelped. My stomach hurts so much. Why did you hurt me so? Philip narrowed his eyes as he observed this exchange. Was Vanessa's aunt deaf, in addition to being ungrateful? How could she not recognize the amazing feat her niece had accomplished on her behalf? Anger rose in him, the same kind he experienced when a cross-examining attorney unjustly grilled one of his clients. He clenched his hand so tightly, his nails dug into his palms. Auntie, Vanessa lamented, I'm sorry I hurt you, but there was no other way. Vanessa was nearly in tears now, she was so distraught. Would you like some water? You should sit down and rest. I will not sit down and rest, her aunt barked. I'm going to call your mother and ask her what kind of daughter she raised. She looked around for her own daughters who quickly rushed over with a cup of water. Thank you, daughters. You are lifesavers, unlike some people. She shot Vanessa a nasty glare. Before the older woman could make more false accusations, Philip planted himself firmly before her. He took Vanessa by the arm, gently guiding her to his side. You did wonderful, my love. Don't let her convince you otherwise. Vanessa's eyes widened, first in surprise, then in fear. She grabbed onto his arm and pled, Philip, it's okay. Just let it go. I cannot let it go. Not when someone I care about is treated so unfairly. He shook off her hands and faced Aunt Winnie squarely. With all due respect, Auntie, you are an unreasonable and petty woman. A minor stomach ache is nothing in comparison to losing consciousness and experiencing brain death. You should be thanking Vanessa for saving your life, not making her feel guilty for trying to help. If you truly saw her heart, you would see there's no way she would harm anyone on purpose. She's the kind of person who chooses to be the bigger person and treats you with respect, even when you don't deserve it. She sacrifices herself for the good of others. Those are the very reasons why I love her. Philip gulped. Those last words had slipped out before he could think twice. Now, they seemed to echo in the silence of the courtyard for every person to hear, including Vanessa. He heard her gasp softly but didn't dare look over. Surely, if she saw his eyes, she would know that his role-playing was not acting at all, but a confession. A confession of his deepest feelings that he'd been attempting to deny for the past week. Somehow, without him realizing it, Vanessa Lim had found a way past his defenses and into his heart. And now that he had fallen for her, he was effectively putting an end to their contract. The first thought that crossed his mind was how he would explain his and Vanessa's breakup to Mr. Wen. Would he lose his promotion as a result? But another, more pressing question surfaced: how could he be happy without her in his life? Aunt Winnie's shrill voice cut through the air. She seemed to have regained her strength and was now ready to give Philip a piece of her mind. She pointed a wrinkled finger in his direction. How dare you speak to your elder like that? You know what? You are perfectly suited for my sister's low-class family. You and Vanessa deserve each other. Philip shook his head, his heart heavy. Actually, that's where you're wrong again. I don't deserve a woman as wonderful as her. And Vanessa certainly doesn't deserve a man like me. It shames me to admit it, but I have been known to be as condescending as you. It's a wonder she puts up with me. He released a long, sad sigh. Even though he knew this was the end of his relationship with Vanessa, he was glad they had been together long enough for him to realize some important truths about himself. For that, he was thankful. Aunt Winnie chose that moment to stomp off with her daughters in tow. Vanessa called out to their backs, "You're welcome. And don't expect an invitation to the wedding." The rest of the crowd fanned out and returned to their previous conversations. Despite his somber mood, Philip cracked a smile. Not only had Vanessa rubbed off on him, he had rubbed off on her as well. The confidence with which she held her head up was a sight to see. It was this spunky attitude that first drew him to her a week ago, and it still mesmerized him. But everything he'd said to her aunt was true. He didn't deserve Vanessa. And soon, he would once again experience life without her. Except that this time around, he would miss everything about her that he'd come to love. Love. That was a word lacking from his vocabulary for far too long. He hardly thought of it anymore, much less spoke of it. He'd guarded his heart for a long time since his college sweetheart left him for another man. But surprisingly, love had found him when he least expected it. If only it would remain a part of his life. Was that even possible? The answer came to him in a soft touch. He looked down to see Vanessa grab his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. Their gazes connected, and the wet sheen of her eyes told him everything he needed to know. Even still, he longed to hear her say them to be sure. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I am now. Thank you for standing up for me. That was a crazy and brave thing to do." "I had no choice," he replied. She was being ridiculous. "You saved her life for goodness sake. Part of me wonders if that was a wise decision on your part." Her eyes widened. "Philip." "I'm kidding, Ness." He smirked. "If you hadn't saved her, I wouldn't have been able to tell her off. So thank you for acting so graciously." She cocked her head and gave him a curious look. "You called me Ness." "Only my close friends call me that." "I did, didn't I?" he replied. "I guess I got carried away with this role-playing." He paused. "We can go back to using last names if you prefer," he suggested, just to be on the safe side. It'd been so long since he'd related to a woman this way, he might have read her signals wrong. Vanessa shook her head. "Don't you dare. I just started getting used to calling you Philip. Mr. Wong sounds so stuffy." "Stuffy?" he exclaimed. "Who are you calling stuffy?" He laughed when she stuck her tongue out at him. "At least stuffy is better than silly." "What's wrong with silly?" she asked. He couldn't tell if her pout was genuine or not. He tapped the tip of her nose playfully to lighten the mood. "Nothing's wrong with that. I for one could use some silliness in my life. I bet you Mr. Wen would agree, too. He would probably say being silly extends your life expectancy." "In that case," she said, "it's a good thing you have me around to keep you young." Vanessa smiled, then shifted her weight from one foot to another. Her expression grew serious as she regarded him. "Just out of curiosity, are we still role-playing?" The uncertainty in her furrowed brows tugged at his heart. "Right now?" "I don't believe so," he stated. "At least for me, I stopped a while ago." Her face brightened. "How long ago?" He pretended to ponder, even though he knew the answer. "I'm pretty certain it was when I used the word love with you in mind. It came so easily, I didn't even think about it. That's when I knew I was no longer pretending. My heart came to life again." He lifted a hand to her face and let it rest there. "What about you? When did you stop?" "When you proposed," she answered. This was news to him. "A week ago." She nodded. "Seeing the softer side of you made you human and likable." "Really likable?" "I wasn't either one before." She wrinkled her nose. "Not particularly. But you've more than redeemed yourself. There was no going back after I saw that side of you, even though I knew romance couldn't be a part of our agreement. That's why I tried to call off this date. You were so stubborn though, you wouldn't back down." "I prefer to call it adamant," he replied. "No, I think the right word is stubborn." He chuckled. "But it's a good thing I didn't give in, or else we wouldn't be where we are right now." She leaned her cheek into his palm and murmured, "And where's that?" "At the beginning of something wonderful," he declared. "Wouldn't you agree?" "Completely." And with that answer, Vanessa threw her arms around him and hugged him, flaws and all. Philip fought back happy tears as he savored their closeness. In that moment, he had a realization. Weddings weren't so bad after all. And loving someone wasn't as scary as he thought it would be. Because Vanessa allowed him to be both vulnerable and brave. Which was why he decided to put an end to their love clause, once and for all. He pulled back and took her hands in his. Dropping to one knee for the second time in a week, he did what he never thought he'd do again. She shook her head, her bottom lip quivering. "Philip, what are you doing?" "Proposing," he replied. She gasped. "What?" "You heard me. Our relationship may not have started out conventionally, but it's changed me. You've changed me. I am a better man because of you, and I can't imagine my life without you. Vanessa Lim, will you take a chance on me, on us, for real this time? Will you marry me?" Tears fell down Vanessa's cheeks as she held his gaze. A wide grin, the widest one he'd ever seen, spread across her lips. She had no hesitation at all when she answered with a resounding yes. He stood up, eager to take the next step. "Shall we kiss on that?" She beamed. "I thought you'd never ask." He gently placed one hand on the small of her back and pulled her flush against himself. With the other hand, he tipped her chin up. Leaning close, he placed his lips on her soft ones, taking his time to savor their connection. And what a connection it was. A relationship that had been based on lies now rang loudly with truth. He didn't need to take an oath to confirm that. His heart told him so. They parted slowly, still holding onto one another in a warm embrace. With their foreheads touching, they locked gazes. "It's time for a new contract," Philip stated, "a lifetime of love together. No clauses needed," he added with a tender smile. She laughed. "I concur. No clauses needed." And with that promise, they sealed the deal with another kiss, the first of many more kisses to come. Epilogue. The following December. Letter addressed to Presiding Judge, Small Claims Court, San Francisco, California. Regarding Winnie Lim vs. Vanessa Lim Wong. Small Claims Case Number 11478. Your Honor, I am writing a character reference for my stepdaughter, Vanessa Lim Wong, who has been accused of physically abusing her aunt, Winnie Lim. My wife first informed me of this case when her sister, Winnie, phoned her to complain about Vanessa essentially saving her life. Our entire family was taken aback at the claim that Vanessa could do anything harmful to anyone, least of all her blood relative. Prior to January of this year, Vanessa was employed at my law firm, formerly Wen, Chen, and Lan, now Wong, Chen, and Lan following my retirement. She displayed an exemplary attitude in handling her work responsibilities and was well liked by all her colleagues. She even went out of her way to help a particularly challenging coworker with his career advancement. Vanessa has never done anything illegal and certainly does not have a criminal record. The only questionable activity she has engaged in is faking a relationship with her now husband, which obviously worked in both their favors. Her mother and I may or may not have done some matchmaking behind the scenes to push them together, so please do excuse this minor indiscretion. We were so happy to find a partner in each other, we wanted to see Vanessa settle down, too. I am confident that once you consider the facts of this case, you will be more than comfortable dismissing it. Should you need to verify any of my statements above, feel free to call me at 415-555-8888. If you reach my voicemail, I'm likely lying on a beach somewhere with my wife for our honeymoon, but I will return your call promptly. I promised her we wouldn't stay away too long. The woman is serious about not missing any of her mahjong games. Sincerely, Jack Wen, J.D. Letter number 2. Letter addressed to Presiding Judge, Small Claims Court, San Francisco, California. Regarding Winnie Lim vs. Vanessa Lim Wong. Small Claims Case Number 11478. Your Honor. On January 1st of this year, at 2 p.m., I attended a wedding with Vanessa Lim Wong, my then fiancée. Just after 2:30 p.m., we exited the ballroom to enjoy cocktails and hors d'oeuvres in the adjoining courtyard. Soon after, we were approached by her aunt, Winnie Lim, who began a conversation with us. At approximately 2:45 p.m., we witnessed Mrs. Lim choke while eating a deep-fried shrimp ball. I clearly saw Mrs. Lim's face turn red as she grabbed at her throat in an effort to breathe. I witnessed my wife, Vanessa, administer the Heimlich maneuver on Mrs. Lim, subsequently dislodging the food from her airway. I can attest my wife saved her aunt's life. Mrs. Lim's allegations of abuse are clearly misguided and unwarranted. This incident in fact inspired my lovely wife, the most gracious person I know, to return to her pursuit of a medical career. She is on track to becoming a family nurse practitioner next year. I did fully support her in becoming a medical doctor, but she chose this shorter route because she would like to start a family soon, which I am not against. Happy wife, happy life, am I correct? I urge you kindly to take my eyewitness account into consideration and dismiss the charges against my wife, and talk some sense into her ungrateful aunt. Respectfully yours, Philip Wong, J.D. Letter number 3, letter addressed to Vanessa Lim Wong. Regarding Winnie Lim versus Vanessa Lim Wong. Small Claims Case number 11478. Dear Mrs. Wong, I am pleased to inform you that the charges brought against you in the case referenced above have been dropped. In all my years of experience serving behind the bench, I have yet to meet someone as ungrateful and misled as your aunt. It makes you wonder about some people, doesn't it? Fortunately, there are other wonderful individuals, such as yourself, who are compassionate and caring, and give the rest of us hope. I wish you and your family all the best. Tell that devoted husband of yours to look me up if he ever wants another career advancement. He'll get a nice gavel in the process. Lastly, your mother told me some good news at our last mahjong game. Congratulations on your bun in the oven. Yours truly, the Honorable Judge Judy.
The end. Thank you so much for listening to this audiobook. To find out more about Liwen Waiho's other books, please visit her website at liwenho.com. And be sure to subscribe to this channel so you'll be notified when a new audiobook releases.